Woo! We got some breaking news, guys, as the stream started, as we go live there. But what is going on?
What do we got?
To the Celtics Talk Weekly trade deadline special, guys. Our annual trade deadline special, my favorite live stream of the year outside of when we get to cover the NBA Finals, of course. But, guys, we got some breaking news. The Phoenix Suns are trading Jusuf Nurkic in a 2026 first-round pick over to the Charlotte Hornets in exchange for Cody Martin, Valel Macic in a second-round draft pick. Guys, weird trade. Obviously, we got a lot to dive into. Jimmy Butler traded last night. We see over to Golden State, a Kevin Durant trade that kind of potentially fell apart. We got a lot to talk about. De'Aaron Fox, we haven't even touched him there in the Celtics Talk Weekly sphere. So we got a lot. Let's briefly discuss what we think about this Phoenix Suns trades. Do we like it? Do we not? Is it kind of a nothing deal? And let's get kicked off, baby. I'm excited.
Yeah, no, I think it was definitely the Suns. We're looking to get into a lot of other guys this year, not just Kevin Durant, but Nurkic was also one of the names that was mentioned too. But yeah, it kind of makes sense for Charlotte and their needs of a center because of Mark Williams, obviously going to Los Angeles last night, because they also need a center as well with Anthony Davis gone. So this definitely helps with more depth at the center spot for them. But I mean, in my opinion, nothing fancy. I mean, obviously, I think Nurkic was a guy that was going to get traded this year when they was brought up. So it just, to move on is, so we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a evening out trade. I think that the Phoenix Suns are really trying to put together whatever they can because they have been bouncing on the line of 500 all season long. Hopefully, this is probably one of the final, well, not hopefully, but this is probably one of the final years that the Phoenix Suns will hold on to the big three of Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker. And this is kind of their tried or true season with that group and core that they've put together. Because if they don't really succeed this year, I don't know if you're going to be seeing any progression in years to come, and you'll probably be seeing a couple of those players move on. But definitely a good depth move for the Phoenix Suns, and then the Charlotte Hornets filled the necessity of getting a center after getting rid of Richards and Williams, who are two young, proven centers who are going to develop in the years coming. So kind of a head scratcher for the Hornets to get rid of them when they're a rebuilding team.
Well, for me, looking at this trade up front, it kind of looks like a nothing deal in terms of the players you're getting in return for the Phoenix Suns and sending out. Yes, you're getting a center in Jusuf Nurkic if you're the Charlotte Hornets, because the Charlotte Hornets, they just traded away two centers, Nick Richards and Mark Williams, over the past month. And now, of course, the Phoenix Suns are trading Jusuf Nurkic to the Charlotte Hornets. That makes sense for me. But in terms of looking at the money aspect of this deal, this is what we're really going to have to focus in on today, is a lot of the money. Because there are a lot of moves that people look at and go, oh, this player's going here, this player's going there. But in reality, some of these players, they won't really matter on court. Yeah, they'll play a couple of games, but it's not really about their impact sometimes. It's about their contract. And you look at Jusuf Nurkic's contract, $18.1 million. And I'll point out, too, there are a couple of teams that we'll see today, and we really have seen already, that will start taking on money from other teams. And it's not as if they're necessarily trying to acquire players, but it's really just the fact of they're eating money and they're eating bigger contracts from other teams. You see teams like the Detroit Pistons doing that with Josh Richardson in the Jimmy Butler deal. You see teams like, of course, the Charlotte Hornets actually doing the same here with Jusuf Nurkic. Now, the Suns, they could get something out of Micic. They could get something out of Cody Martin, but ultimately, I'm not really expecting them to come in and propel the Suns from the 10 seed all the way to the 5 seed or anything like that. I think this is more of up front, it looks more like a money move to me. Now, if I look at the contract of Cody Martin here real quick, you see Jusuf Nurkic, he's at $18.1 million. Cody Martin, on the other hand, he is at right now, he's on a 4-year, $31 million contract. So his salary per year, it's only 7.6 around. Yeah. The average, so he's what? The average annual salary is about 7.8 million there. Micic, I know he's not making very much money whatsoever. So this seems like a salary cutting deal if you're the Phoenix Suns. But I want to point out here, so yeah, an average salary of about 7.8 million for Micic as well. He's actually making 7.7 this year. So if you look at the deal straight up, the Suns they're cutting $4 million essentially from their books right now. And what's interesting for me in terms of that is the Suns, they seem to be all in with their big three, of course, with the big three, right? Booker, Durant, certainly that's a dynamic duo, but then you have Bradley Beal there, fifth highest paid player in the league, and Bradley Beal, certainly not the fifth best NBA player in the league. But that big three, they're certainly going all in. But right now, the Phoenix Suns are actually cutting money from their books. Now, we do see contending teams do this every once in a while, but I will say the Phoenix Suns, they've been in some really interesting rumors the past couple of days, and I do wonder if there are more moves on the horizon for the Phoenix Suns before the deadline, because we heard Kevin Durant's name come up in rumors. We could talk about that going on here in a little bit, but ultimately this trade, you're trading away one of your Yusuf Nurkic. He was a starter at the beginning of the season, then he started coming off the bench, of course. But you're trading a rotation player here if you're the Phoenix Suns, and you're also shipping off money. So that does indicate to me that maybe there could be more moves on the way. Bradley Beal, of course, no trade clause, so he would have to approve anything. Devin Booker probably isn't going anywhere. We've heard KD's name in a lot of rumors, but I do wonder if the Suns, this is what I think, from a standpoint of Kevin Durant, he said he wants to stay in Phoenix, but at the same time, I look at the situation and go, they're really far down there in the standings. Now, they're only one game away from not being in the play-in right now, but at the same time, they're on the opposite end of the play-in. And from that standpoint, I do wonder if Kevin Durant might want to go to a team that's a little bit more competitive right now, knowing this Phoenix Suns team isn't competitive. But we'll certainly have to see what happens with the Phoenix Suns. We can maybe go from there, talking more about Kevin Durant and the Phoenix Suns, because this Yusuf Nurkic deal, it's a little interesting to me that the Suns are cutting money right now, I will say.
Yes, for sure. And guys, I just want to welcome in two more heads to the trade deadline special, guys. Obviously, the X-Man, and we just want to give a huge shout out to the first special guest. Cam, I'm sorry, I might butcher the last name. I'm sure you get this a lot.
Now you got to try.
Yeah, Cam Taba Tabe.
Not even close.
No.
Tabe. I go by Mr. T in the classroom for a reason.
All right. Here we go. We're big fans on X. Thank you so much for joining us in. Obviously,
Sure.
News just broke with the Yusuf Nurkic. We're kind of talking Phoenix right now in their direction. Obviously, with the Jimmy Butler trade, we kind of, heard some rumors of Kevin Durant making their way and a potential deal that fell apart. Now we're kind of looking at Phoenix thinking, where's really their direction?
Look, they're selling people $2 hot dogs. They can do whatever they want. Like they have set the standard for ownership of the NBA that like no one else seems to want to match. So they painted themselves in the corner. The second apron comes for all. I mean, that's what happened with the Bucks with Chris Middleton. Like the Sixers are ducking the tax. It's really expensive to field a roster that doesn't win. Like Boston only made like $100 million in profit last year, winning the title, something like that. So yeah, if you're on a crash course for the play-in and you're fielding a $200 million tax bill, you're going to duck it as best you can. And I think I just saw on Twitter next year they're going to be saving $20 million with this move by getting rid of Nurkic. So it's not like sexy or interesting commentary if like you love hoops, but the fact of the matter is the new CBA, like what I've said is I think the new CBA is going to have a humongous effect on guys who shouldn't have earned the max money, but I think the max contract's a problem for the NBA because there's lots of guys like Jason should make more than 35% of the cap. He's more than 35% of the most important guy on the floor, right? There are plenty of guys who are not 35% players, but because there's like an arbitrary line, they barter for it. So like Zach LaVine isn't worth that much money. He's a fabulous player, but it's just like financial prison. So Bradley Beal, same thing. So I think the new CBA is coming for the second tier stars who either they're coasting off reputation and they don't deserve that money anymore, or they bartered for it and they're probably not earning it. And so many of the moves that we're seeing is just about saving money. Like say what you will about Dallas, they're under the luxury tax. and they're run by
Right.
notoriously cheap people. So, yeah, I think I think the answer to like most questions in this country is it's money.
Right. Money talks.
But shout out
Xavier.
the $2 hot dogs. That's awesome. I love that.
Right. You can go there and get a beer and a hot dog for what, $4, $5?
Actually, want to jump in on this recent Phoenix move, use of Nurkic to the Hornets?
Yeah, I'm not surprised by anything Phoenix is doing. I think when Ishbia came in, he thought this would be a little bit easier of a project than it has been. I think he was a bit overzealous when he started, and he thought he could just pair a few superstars together and call it a day. And I think where they are right now, Nurkic was overpaid. And I think beyond the money aspect, just if you just look at why this team is not succeeding, beyond the fact that it tried to build around a superstar nucleus that wasn't good enough because Bradley Beal isn't close to that. Nurkic is a guy that they tried to move off for a little while. They had to attach a first round pick to him for a reason. And I think the story of his last few years is he's kind of just a big lug who has no interest in playing defense. And he doesn't offer much besides being a post present down on the block and occasionally getting into a fight with somebody. And I think the problem with Nurkic is that kind of guy is being moved away from the modern NBA. You saw Valanciunas this year in Washington try to shoot a few more mid-range jumpers and occasionally extend to the three-point line. Those are similar guys to me. But his willingness is something that Nurkic has not yet explored. And I think that's a problem in the modern NBA. And as far as Phoenix's long-term future, I think they're reaching a slippery slope because if they move Durant, I just wouldn't be surprised if Booker is sick of this project. It's been over a decade now with Booker and Phoenix. And I think the problem is if you're Booker, you went through the Chris Paul teams after being a rebuilding team for the first bulk of your career. Now you're going through the Kevin Durant experiment. When is enough for Booker? I don't think anyone would feel necessarily bad if Booker asked out. And there's teams like Houston that are sitting right there with the amount of capital that are ready to make a move for a guy like Devin Booker. There's always a team like Miami who can easily free up the cap space if they're able to flip Wiggins this offseason. That is a destination that could promise Booker the world and living in South Beach, another warm climate for him. So I think it's one of those things that, yes, they can get off Durant and try to salvage that package as much as they can and even try to get off Beal this summer. Good luck with that. But it's coming at the risk of losing your franchise superstar.
I think what we're seeing out of Phoenix right now is a direct correlation to the play-in because it kind of gives these mediocre – I don't want to call Phoenix – let me know they're a mediocre team. It gives these mediocre teams that kind of, dwindle between the 6 seed and the 11 seed an excuse to, keep going in bringing in these kind of like these weird super – like the Chicago Bulls – are a great example of this out east, right? They have yet to hit the rebuild button because why? Because every year they're playing in the play-in and wait, hold on, we might get into the playoffs. So I think I'm with you guys. I mean, first of all, this is kind of a nothing deal. Financially, it makes sense for Phoenix. I think Phoenix is kind of at a point right now where they're a little bit desperate, and I think they were hoping to get Jimmy Butler. And then Jimmy Butler gets sent off to Golden State guys. And we haven't talked about that yet because it kind of broke last night later into the night. I'm interested to hear where everyone's at with that because personally, I look at that move and on paper, on first glance, you think to yourself, okay, this is actually kind of a nice move for Golden State, right? They kind of get a win now guy to pair next to Steph Curry for this next, this little push. And they're in a crowded Western Conference where I personally think anything can happen out West right now. And then that 2-year, $121 million contract extension kicks in, and I start to get my doubts. I don't know about you guys, but where are you at between that, between Jimmy Butler heading out West? And it's great he's not in the East anymore. We don't have to worry about that guy randomly turning up on us.
We didn't.
Well, no, go ahead, Franco. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think it's very strange the tide shifting over West again. I think that the East has shallowed out a lot more over the past couple of years just because teams have been doing a better job of developing. You're kind of getting a sense that teams are starting to develop a little bit more on the Eastern Conference. You're seeing teams like the Pacers stick to their young guys, the teams like the Magic, but it seems like the Suns and teams like the Warriors are just trying to piece together whatever they can get left out of their star players like Curry and Durant.
Well, yeah, the Jimmy Butler situation is definitely interesting to me because there was that rumor that Brian Windhorst had out there last night that there was a 3-team deal in place for Jimmy Butler to go to Phoenix and Kevin Durant to be traded to the Warriors, back to the Warriors, really reuniting with Steph Curry yet again. But what confused me about that was, why would Phoenix want Jimmy Butler? I mean, maybe you want the 1 year of Jimmy Butler's contract next year, but then you don't give him an extension.
I'm sorry, Seamus. I'm sorry,
Go
Seamus.
ahead.
We got some
Some
news.
breaking
We gotta
news?
break it.
I
It
see
won't be
it.
the
I
first
see
time.
it. Go ahead, bro.
I am going to take this opportunity, however, just to bring in Will Weir here from the Celtics. How are we doing,
What's
Will?
up, fellas?
Will?
Doing
How we
doing
doing?
good. Happy to join in the middle of some breaking news here.
I know, right? So here we go. We got the Atlanta Hawks trading for DeAndre Hunter to the Cleveland Cavaliers in exchange for Karis LeVert, Georges Niang, 3 second-round picks, and 2 pick swap, or two of which are swaps. Guys, now this is a move that this directly impacts the Boston Celtics. So this is good. I'm happy.
That's
here
actually a
that
pretty
we'll be able to
crazy
talk.
one. That's wow.
Yeah, this is a big one. This is a Cleveland team, guys, that has kind of been praying for some forward help. They really have had lackluster forward play outside of what Mitchell and Garland obviously do at the guard spot, and then Mobley and Allen do down there. So this right here, is this Cleveland inching closer to Boston? Does this move the needle for you guys?
Definitely an improvement for them. I think they definitely are going away from their depth that they were playing with in the last game. You saw players like LeVert and Niang having some progress and also helping out the Cavaliers off the bench. But I think they became a much more powerful starting five, and I think it adds a lot more talent to this Cavaliers roster. And it's kind of a win now statement, because we were saying that Randy was saying in the post game a few games ago that the Cavaliers are almost just as likely, if not as likely, as the Magic to win a championship in the next upcoming future.
You know what's insane about that, Franco, is Randy was the one shouting out during last post game that the Cleveland Cavaliers needed to go out there and make a move. And what do we see here? The Cavaliers actually went out and made a move at 40-10, their record right now. And the Cleveland Cavaliers, we talked about it last post game too, that their versatility isn't always there within their lineups. I think DeAndre Hunter certainly gives the Cavs a lot of versatility out there on the floor to go play in different styles. And I'm very interested to see whether he will start or come off the bench. It's very possible he starts, because they really have that middle forward spot that you think you have Mitchell, you have Garland, you have Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley, but then that 3 spot, it can really go to DeAndre Hunter. And I know they have their guys in which they start there, Max Strus, Dean Wade even, but I really do think DeAndre Hunter can come in there and make an impact with the Cleveland Cavaliers ultimately at the end of the day. And we will definitely, I think they've added something to their roster that they didn't have against the Boston Celtics the other night, which is just that versatility at the forward spot that I would even say, like, within that game the other night, right? And let's actually get this up here on screen real quick, so we can let people know what we're talking about here, which would be the Cleveland Cavaliers acquiring Mr. DeAndre Hunter, because that's what we're talking about right now. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, they acquired DeAndre Hunter, and ultimately this move gives the Cavaliers more roster versatility, 100%. And they're all in right now because they're 40-10. They're atop the Eastern Conference, and there's no reason why the Cleveland Cavaliers shouldn't go all in at this moment in time, because the Cleveland Cavaliers, after the LeBron era, they were awful, and they've really been building back up to this moment at this point in time. And right now, I believe that this DeAndre Hunter move does give the Cavaliers a little a better look than they've had with their team this season, and I do believe that he could help them in the playoffs later on in time, because I'm surprised Atlanta even moved on from DeAndre Hunter, quite honestly. But the Cleveland Cavaliers, they certainly get themselves a more versatile forward than, say, Max Strus, say Dean Wade, and everybody off their bench. It really isn't cutting it for the Cleveland Cavaliers in terms of the mismatches that the Celtics were able to gain against the Cavaliers, and that they were able to exploit going ahead into the playoffs. And what's interesting too, Celtics do have one more matchup against the Cleveland Cavaliers, so we'll see the new look Cavs in that matchup later on. I believe in March. That is, it might be
wanna say
this
the
month or
28th.
March.
I
Yeah.
think it's late February or March.
Don't be shy here, guys.
Yeah.
Feel free to pop in.
Anybody jump
Yeah,
in?
Don't be
let
shy.
me jump in there. I haven't got
Anybody
my
can
feet
jump
wet
in.
on this quite yet, but I think the versatility piece you just hit on, that's one of the biggest parts of this. Watching the Celtics and Cavs game earlier this week, a little bit too much George Niang. I think there's just a lot of Niang and a lot of these late game lineups the Cavs had going on. Karis LeVert, even though he can score, it's become kind of redundant with the emergence of Ty Jerome. Like, they don't really need him to score as much, or his ball handling, right, has become kind of offset with what Ty Jerome brings. And so, after that Cavs game on our show, we were talking a lot of, is this a Cam Johnson spot? And I think DeAndre Hunter kind of fills the similar void, not quite the shooter as Cam Johnson, but a much better defender. And so I think that actually kind of leans into the Cavs identity. And I think when you talk about that versatility piece, that was one of the bigger questions for the Cavs. Like you mentioned, there's Garland, there's Mitchell, there's Mobley, there's Allen. But at some point in some series, you're going to have one of those two on each side kind of off the court. And then who do you fill that with? And I like Dean Wade. His availability hasn't really been there. We've seen Dean Wade beat the Celtics in a game last year. It's pretty memorable. And then you have, Max Strus. We've seen him through the Heat battles. And so now if you have Hunter, Strus, and Wade that are kind of filling that gap in between, Ty Jerome providing, 15, 16 minutes of additional ball handling, and then you're just kind of, can we play with two bigs or do we need to go with one big? That's a lot better versatility. Now, a big part of this is Hunter's been healthy this year. And I saw someone in the chat put, Peyton Pritchard's probably biggest competition for sixth man of the year is DeAndre Hunter, depending if Amen Thompson ends up still, with enough eligibility there. Those are probably the top three guys that you look at. So I think Hunter's a pretty significant upgrade for the Cavs, especially giving up two guys that, were fringe rotation or probably shouldn't have really been in a top tier playoff rotation. And you get a guy that, is in competition for sixth man of the year. We'll see where this brings them, up to the Celtics level. But I definitely look at them in the East as no doubt they're the team that I look at that has enough depth and versatility to challenge the C's for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I got to dip soon. So I would just add, this is the best the Cavs are ever going to be. So they have to swing for the fences. If it doesn't work again this year, they'll probably look at trading Garland or Allen and just shuffle the deck, built around Mobley and Donovan Mitchell. So yeah, it's a lot of assets, but
I was going to say this is the best deal that they probably could have done this year at the deadline, is to make the move for a good wing.
Absolutely.
I mean, and they definitely got Hunter in there right on the bat, so that's awesome.
Yeah, to Will's point, the guys they're sending out weren't really playing, or if they were, it was kind of a problem maybe for the Cavs. I mean, if you just watch that Celtics Cavs game in the second half, they're just feeding Jason Tatum to go up against wings who can't defend him or mismatches. So yeah, Hunter might have the most pressure on him in the Eastern Conference playoffs now because he is supposed to be the Jason Tatum stopper, but we'll see. It's a fascinating move by the Cavs. I really appreciate that they're going all out for it, because sometimes teams say good enough, and for them to say hey, we don't have this in the bag, even with the record, let's rock and roll.
And this has been the hole for so long, Cam, right? This has always been, even ever since they made the Mitchell move, it was okay, who's that one wing connector? And they hoped it was a Coro. He's fine. He's not the answer. They've tried to, Max Strus, once again, he's fine. I think Hunter, when available, he's the best of anyone that they've tried to fill in that role. Just going to come down to availability. And if he's there, and then you still have the Strus and Dean Wade, that's a really good platoon. If you're not going to have, one of the top guys, that's a really good wing platoon to supplement between an amazing backcourt and an amazing front court.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you what.
Anyways, I gotta dip everyone, but thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining in, Cam.
Yeah, thank you.
See you all.
So, that's something I want to play off there too, is when you look at, in particular, the Celtics Cavs matchup, because it kind of feels like that's where Cleveland's heading, right? They're looking at Boston. They're saying, okay, how can we take these guys down? Even New York, really, I'd throw in there as well, because the New York and Boston, who are obviously, in my eyes, the two top teams in the Eastern Conference, they are very wing forward heavy teams. They have a bunch of versatile wings that can really do it all. You look in Boston, you got obviously Tatum and Brown, who are going to give, teams living hell out there on the wing. And then even New York, I mean, they've kind of acquired this team that's really like a wing heavy Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby. And then kind of Karl Anthony Towns is like this makeshift wing center that kind of, right. Exactly. So I look at this move as Cleveland. One, it's a new addition, right? This is a team that made 0 acquisitions this offseason, right? They rolled in with the same team. They swap head coaches. They give Kenny Atkinson the keys, and they've been much better. But the one kind of, looming factor with Cleveland for me was this is the same team. This is the same exact team that got beat by Boston in 5 games pretty handedly last year. Obviously, the Donovan Mitchell injury, but now I think this moves the needle a little bit for them, where I'm looking at them and it's okay. They filled in a gap. They kind of matched. They added a wing that can be versatile, that plays defense, I think, at a pretty high level, and can shoot the ball when he gets going, just as good as anybody. And then they added something new, and I think that they added a new piece that it's going to give Boston, and Hunter's going to give Boston or New York, wherever they see in the second round or in the Eastern Conference Finals, assuming they'll be there, that he can give them some trouble. So I like this move for sure. Or I don't like it, but I like it at the same time.
Here's the official Shams tweet as well. So you see DeAndre Hunter for Karis LeVert and Georges Niang. And Georges Niang gets to go be annoying on the Hawks now. And Karis LeVert, I would say Karis LeVert too. I think he's been falling out of favor in Cleveland for quite some time, even during this season. He was a much bigger part of their team 2 years ago, and even last year, than he has been this year. So I think from even that aspect, I think you're really just looking at the fact the Cavaliers upgraded from LeVert and Niang as a pairing right there, because both of those guys weren't bringing a whole lot to the roster. And I'm really not concerned about the second round picks. Now the 2 swaps, I mean, you look at this trade and you almost go, wow, without the star players, they almost got more for DeAndre Hunter. The Cleveland Cavaliers, the Atlanta Hawks got more for DeAndre Hunter on the back end of this deal than the Dallas Mavericks got for Luka Doncic. But I'm not really sure where those swaps are coming from, whether they're first round or second round swaps. Yeah. We'll have to see, but certainly some draft capital in there coming to the Atlanta Hawks, incoming there to Atlanta, and Cleveland really going all in for DeAndre Hunter here on this particular deal. So there we have it, folks.
Well, guys, let's take a look at the Celtics side of things. We haven't really talked about this here. We're 20 minutes in, and we got people asking. So obviously the Springer move yesterday, right? In X, you shake your head because you're a big Springer believer. So we could start you off here. So you move Springer, you clear $15 million off the books, right? This is a deal that you knew Springer at some point coming into the season, right? We thought maybe at first they were going to deal him to just open up a spot for Walker. However, Brad was unable to do that. So moving forward, we kind of look at Springer as a piece that can maybe get you something on the back end of this roster, maybe another forward, maybe another big man, right? Fast forward to, rewind, I guess now, but yesterday hits and Boston moves off of Springer, right? They don't get anything returned. They get this draft pick. And then, that opens up a TPE, right? Which is, I believe, $4 million. Boston has until 3:00 today to use it. Now, do you see Boston making any moves? Is it with the Springer TPE? Is it moving Tillman? Is it elevating Peterson, who I personally think this is the move that happens, to that 14th, and I call it the 14th and final roster spot because Brad's not filling that 15th. He's keeping that open. So what do you see coming from the Boston side of things, X?
I don't disagree with you. I think they've been rather complacent the last few months with everything. Let's start with the Springer thing first, though. Regardless what you think of Springer as a player, I think it sets a bad precedent that you trade the guy who plays by far the hardest on your roster. And for a long time, people have talked about their concerns with the toughness level of this team, and I've never really bought into that because I think it's tough to beat a team that makes shots the way the Celtics have throughout the last year and a half. And they don't need to have this moxie and flex and get into arguments with teams to show their toughness. It proves in their game. But I think what Springer does bring is a different level of tenacity and an ability to raise his play when it matters. And regardless of how good you think he is, like I mentioned, it's that energy that this team needs in spurts. And trading a guy like that, I think, just sets a bad precedent because regardless of saving the money, he was a guy who came in and genuinely shifted the culture of the team when he was in there. And if Jaden Springer can do that, then what does that say about the rest of the team at points? And I think too much this year, we've seen this team look flat at times. We've seen this team look low energy. We've seen this team coast. And that's totally fine because they're the defending champions, and that's what happens in the NBA. But I think it's a dangerous game to trade a guy who can kind of negate that in spurts and raise the boats of everyone else's energy. But regardless of what is the Celtics going to do today, I think moving Tillman would be a good idea. I think the entire acquisition has been a flop. I think for the most part of his tenure, they've tried to make him an Al Horford 2.0, Al Horford in waiting, and that's been a disaster. That's not his play style. I think it's been a miss by the coaching staff and the organization as a whole to try to make him something he's just really not, and it's kind of deteriorated his impact on the team. And getting off of him wouldn't be a bad move. And if you're going to elevate Drew Peterson, that's fine. I'm not going to be the first to say I'm excited about that. I think Drew's a decent player. I've seen him plenty in college here in Eugene when he was with the Trojans. He's fine. He has the okay handle. He's a streaky shooter that when it goes in, it looks really good. He's competitive on defense more than people give him credit for, but I think that's still going to be a problem. And if your deadline move is moving off Springer and or Tillman and elevating Peterson, what does that say about the we don't really have an owner right now, but what does that say about the lack of ownership? Because if the standard is the Golden State Warriors of the last decade, Joe Lacob always paid the tax. Joe Lacob always made these marginal moves to make that team better, okay? And if you're not going to even attempt to try to do that, when you have this window, which you know you have Tatum and Brown, but guys like Drew, guys like Porzingis, guys like Holiday are going to be tough to contain during this second apron era. Thank you, CJ McCollum. Then you have to go all out for it when it matters. And I think this move just shows complacency, and I hate that when you have this title window. I just feel like they're sitting on their hands, and I hate that personally.
Can I push back on that a little bit? And
Please
the only
do.
only thing I would say is, so like, you're right. Thank you, CJ McCollum, CBA. But that's where the crux of this issue is, right? Because even going for it, like when you look at the Celtics salaries, because they can't aggregate salaries, right? They can't put two salaries together and go get a $10 million guy. So you got to look at, who out of that group that you would, because the question is, are we going to do anything today? Like if we're just using the TPE or we're trying to trade minimum salaries, like you're super limited. Like Yabusele to me is the only interesting guy, unless I'm missing somebody that could potentially be out there. That's one of the only somewhat rumored names I've seen that I actually think is appealing and could make a difference. Otherwise, I think it's going to be more kind of just, a Tillman level move, which, hey, shout out to Tillman for that 1 3-pointer in game 3. That was a big moment. So at least we'll always have that when it comes to Xavier Tillman. But, for them going all in, quote unquote, or pushing their chips in and not being complacent, I just don't really see, unless you're willing to trade Drew Holiday now versus the offseason, like, which I don't think there's probably going to be a deal out there that would make sense. Like, I just don't know what salary you're moving that's gonna move the needle. And that's, to me, that's more of just the CBA than it is whatever. To your point, whoever's running the things as our ownership right now is making the call. Is I just think they're just extremely limited on what they could do right now.
Well,
I think that's a valid point.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that before we pass the rock around. I think that's a valid point. I think my issue with the entire situation is I just don't feel bad for them getting under the cap and getting under the second tax rather. And I understand why they do that, and I truly do. But at the same time, this is the reigning defending champions, and saving money during a title push, I'm just never going to get on board with that. And again, I understand the reasons why the impact the move makes is greater than the play he was providing on the court at this time. But even a few nights ago against Cleveland, late in that game, the Celtics were a disaster defensively for like a 3-minute stretch. And I was sitting there and I was like, you know who would be awesome in this game right now? Jaden Springer, just for 2 minutes, just to run around and show his energy. And I think just that on the roster was never fully unlocked by Joe Mouse. And I just would have liked to see a little bit more of it. We got a little bit of a sprinkle in the last few weeks, but I just wanted to see a little bit more to see where that could go.
I think that was just to try to trade him, probably instead of just getting off him for nothing.
Oh,
exactly.
I agree with you on the energy part. Though.
I think that's kind of the Springer experience over the past 3 weeks was them trying to showcase him. Hey, league, look what this guy can do defensively. He's kind of a pest, and he's kind of so. I'd fully trust Brad Stevens. I mean, maybe it's I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I really do believe that every move he makes, it's coming from. It's the best move to be made. I think they shopped them. I think they checked the market, and I don't think there was anything out there. I don't think I don't think right now teams are looking at Boston and necessarily interested in making a move with us. I think a lot of them are kind of like, am I getting fleeced? Am I adding fuel to what this already beast of a team is? So I think, one, you could look at that aspect. And two, I agree with you, Will, where you look around the league right now and how much is there really to add to this roster that's going to, in a playoff series, an 8-man rotation playoff series, really give us a lot. And I think from that aspect, if you're Boston, you're going to kind of have to stand pat. I mean, this core rotation deserves a second go at it. You're not going to move anybody in there. And, from the back end side of things, I agree with you, X. I think Springer is a great regular season guy to bring in and keep these guys going against, lower quality teams. But I don't think this is really a move. I mean, it's a little frustrating, right? You save $15 million in a team that's worth $1 billion. Or multiple billion, but I don't think there's a market out there for Springer, and I think that's just the harsh truth about it.
No, there's definitely not a market out there for Springer, because if there was, he would have been gone at the beginning. He would have been gone at the and here comes Randy. We just saw a comment on the bottom. We want to. Yep,
Let's
here we go. I
go,
want to hear
Randall.
Randy's takes on the entire deadline. But let me touch on Springer real quick before we kick it on over to Randy real quick, because there was no market for Springer at the beginning of the season, because if there was, the Celtics would have traded him before the season. And the reason they would have done that is because they were trying to clear his $4 million off the books at the beginning of the year to go and sign Lonnie Walker to the roster. And what ended up happening was no team wanted to trade for Jaden Springer, and no offers were fielded by the Boston Celtics and Brad Stevens. And of course, we saw Jaden Springer on the roster this season, and Lonnie Walker, he was waived at the beginning of the year. If Jaden Springer, if at the beginning of the year, Brad Stevens was able to move on from Jaden Springer, he would have, because he was the 8th highest paid player. Jaden Springer was the 8th highest paid player on the Boston Celtics, yet you really cannot say he's the 8th best player on the Boston Celtics. And ultimately, I will say this as well. There was a report that came out earlier this season that the Boston Celtics, they were gauging the interest on Jaden Springer around the league. They weren't gauging the interest. Brad Stevens wasn't gauging the interest of Jaden Springer. He was frantically looking all over the league in order to ship off Jaden Springer's contract, and there were no buyers. There were no takers of Jaden Springer's contract, and that was all to sign Lonnie Walker at the beginning of the season. Didn't happen, and now, of course, later on down the line, the Celtics ship out Jaden Springer and his $4 million. It, of course, saves them $15 million on the luxury tax bill, in which is coming out of the owner's pocket, whichever owner's pocket it's coming out of at this point in time. But I will say I agree with X on the fact that this team is cheaped out so far in terms of pursuing a title. We saw it at the beginning of the year with Lonnie Walker. If they really wanted Lonnie Walker, give him the minimum, add to the luxury tax bill, and we have Lonnie Walker to come off the bench. Instead, the team goes cheap. They let Lonnie Walker go, and then now we're seeing at the deadline, and Jaden Springer, he's out the door. But I also will point out with this as well, the Celtics are going to save money by trading away Jaden Springer, and we'll see what they do with Tillman later in the day. But if they trade off those two players, and specifically Springer here, and then add in 2 veteran minimum contracts or just minimum contracts, they'll be able to fill their roster. And it could be a buyout candidate, could be a guy like Kyle Anderson, who knows at the end of the day, who could be a little better than Jaden Springer. But that is also going to save the Celtics money while also adding to the roster. And I think, too, it could add a couple of better players to the roster. But I will say, Jaden Springer, he was a player that we needed to see more of in the last couple of weeks. We only saw him really in that Clippers game. We saw him in spurts here and there. But really, Jaden Springer, at the moment in which the Celtics were really struggling, we should have seen Jaden Springer a lot more because his defensive presence was impactful out on the floor, and you really cannot say enough good things about defensive players. His offensive game certainly has a long way to go in the NBA, but his defensive game, it is almost at an elite level, and I really wonder where Jaden Springer can go still in his NBA career because he's still 22, 23 years old. He's going to the Houston Rockets. Who knows if they'll even keep him on the roster or what they'll do with them. But Jaden Springer, there's certainly some potential there from the defensive end of the floor. Offensively, it's a complete mess, I will say. But defensively, Jaden Springer was certainly a highlight on this Boston Celtics team. But at the end of the day, the play sometimes doesn't matter. We see really with the Phoenix Suns, and we've seen it across the league. The play sometimes just doesn't matter. It's about cutting that money, saving money. And I will say I agree with X in the fact that I'm just not in with the Celtics cheaping out right now in terms of
can I just
pursuit of a championship. They're cheaping
hold
out.
on,
They could pay more money, and they're not doing it. They're cutting
hold on.
fringe. They cut Lonnie Walker at the beginning of the year to save
I'm going to
money.
disagree.
That's what they did.
All right, they did, and obviously Justin, Randy, how we doing, guys? Welcome in. Real quick, I'm going to let you guys go, but I just want to say something. I think this cheaping out narrative you guys are starting, I'm not sure if I'm a fan of it.
But it's true. See, it's not a narrative. It's true because if it wasn't true, we would have Lonnie Walker. We would have just kept Jaden Springer on the roster. But we're not.
I think what you're seeing is the harsh reality of the second apron NBA. And this is a team that is paying almost $1 billion to their top five guys.
I was going to say
they extended
5-6 years.
Right, 5-6 years. They extended Holiday, they extended White, they locked up Tatum this offseason. I mean, they emptied their pockets where it was needed. Have they kind of danced around the back half of the roster? Absolutely, I think. I think they have. But I mean, this money they're pouring into their top guys is just ridiculous, and it really handicaps you. I don't think you don't have the luxury to make those moves at the back end of your roster when you're a team like Boston, just because they are financially in I mean, they're handicapped right now, and I don't know. I sure have they skimped out a little bit towards the back end, but to say this team's cheaped out, I think is very unfair to management from just how much money they've poured into the starters.
I mean, that's a fair point, but at the same time, I think if you want to go big, you're either going to go big or you're going to go home, and they went home
fair.
On the back end of the roster.
It's fair to be frustrated, I think.
But I will say, we'll have to see the narrative of this playing out too, because they extended Holiday and White, and Porzingis is still on a big deal. And he's actually, what's funny about Porzingis playing well lately is the fact he's actually the next one up for an extension. And that's really, I think, his motivation at this moment in time. But Tatum and Brown as well, huge contracts. But I think in the future, we'll see the Celtics, they'll put their money where their mouth is, or they won't, because I think in the future we could see one of the guys we're talking about right now. Oh, they threw big bucks at the starting five. That's true, but at some point in time they could go, oh, Holiday, maybe he's not worth this money. I wouldn't bet Derek White. I wouldn't bet Tatum. Brown, we'll see in the future, I think, too. Yeah, Brown has to be a conversation still in the future. I know we think of Brown and Tatum as the pillars, but obviously we just saw Luka Doncic be moved, so it's in terms of, and Jaylen Brown doesn't have the same problems as Luka Doncic by any means, but you can see anything. The point is, anything could happen in the NBA, and you really look at Porzingis as well. You never know when this team could eventually go, you know what, we're not really down to pay these dollars moving into the future. And one thing that kind of worries me just a little bit is the fact the ownership is changing. Now, it could be the Celtics could fall into the hands of a richer owner than they have now, or richer owners, I will say. But at the same time, anytime you're changing ownership, there's a culture change within the building as well, and really a way of spending. I will say it too. So it's going to be an interesting conversation moving into the future in terms of what they'll do with even the top half of the roster. But for this year, I really do think the Celtics, in terms of really filling out the entire roster, did cheap out. But I do agree with your point still, Rob, of the fact that they did spend at the top.
Well, Justin, Randy.
Yep.
I'm dying to get you. I'm dying. How are we doing on this cold New England snowy day?
You're dying to get us in here.
I am. I'm interested to hear what you guys have.
This from okay, Celtics bias aside, Celtics fan aside, this is one of the most fun trade deadlines I think I've ever seen, at least in a long time. This is a whirlwind of moves that we've seen, and a lot of moves that we're seeing players that we didn't think would be traded. If you were to ask us a year, maybe 2 years today, Jimmy Butler was the franchise of the Miami Heat. Now he's out to Golden State. Luka Doncic, the future of Dallas, the next Dirk Nowitzki Dallas, out of Dallas. I mean, there's been a lot of surprising moves, a lot of fun moves, and a move that I want to touch on really quick and just give my thoughts on. Obviously, as a Celtics fan, I probably don't want to admit this, but I really love DeAndre Hunter from a basketball standpoint. As a basketball fan, I really like DeAndre Hunter being sent to the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think that's tremendous for the Cavaliers. You're dishing out two wings, but you're getting probably a wing that's better than both of them combined, with all due respect. Karis LeVert in this past season really hasn't provided much when he's been able to stay healthy for the Cavaliers. And then Niang, man. I was texting. I was texting with a Cleveland fan the other night, another Cleveland page, and I was saying to him, I'm like, I think I feel bad for you, because every single time the Cavaliers gained a little bit of momentum in that game the other night, Niang absolutely took them out of it. Absolutely,
way too much Niang in these Cavs rotations.
I said, this whole Niang on Tatum thing, it didn't work in Game 6 of the semifinals last year when Tatum went bananas, or they could have been 2 years ago. And it didn't work in Boston earlier this year. I mean, he dismissed the minivan on the Mass Pike. Ended up in the balcony. And I'm not a big Niang guy. And this is also a guy where lost a lot of respect for when he went on a podcast, and he essentially said how he was basing his career off of Ben Simmons' career, and how he hated how the Ben Simmons situation went down because, he really felt like he couldn't play at his best because of Ben Simmons. And to me, as a professional athlete, if you're going to base your game solely off another guy's game, that just doesn't sit right with me. But this is a really tremendous move for the Cleveland Cavaliers, a really, really, really good move for the Cavaliers. And another move that I had texted in the group chat this morning, I'm like, I don't know what direction or what exactly the Toronto Raptors are doing. They sent out, I believe it was Davion Mitchell for PJ Tucker. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that was about. I really don't see the vision on that. But this has just been a really, really fun trade deadline. I mean, we're waking up to Luka Doncic the other night getting traded in the middle of the night, and we're figuring out if it's AI, if Shams was hacked, if the edits were photoshopped. But no, all of it was true, and everything. And Seamus, you've been so big on like, oh my gosh, like all these trades before the actual trade deadline day. And no, even to this very moment, we're still getting caught off guard by some pretty incredible trades. So just as a basketball fan, despite not really much movement in the Celtics side of things, this has been a spectacularly fun trade deadline.
Yeah. Kind of like you were saying, Justin, this whole DeAndre Hunter trade, it's really interesting because if you guys, whoever was on post game for the Cavs game,
we've already mentioned this too.
I gave you your flowers earlier.
We've already called you out.
I brought up so many times how this team's not winning anything. They're not, and you give up Niang, and Yang's one of those guys that he reminds me actually. All the time I hear on these broadcasts for the Cavaliers, oh, Niang's finally found a home with the Cavs. He's kind of been a journeyman throughout his career, and he's finally on a contract. He's found a home in Cleveland, and now look what happens. He gets shipped off. So it's just interesting because DeAndre Hunter now, he kind of adds some versatility on both ends of the floor. He can kind of do it all. And I think when you pair a guy like Hunter, who is so versatile on both ends of the floor, up with Garland and Mitchell, I think you can have, with Garland and Mitchell, right? You have a decent core. I was talking about Merrill, Dean Wade, all these mediocre guys, even LeVert, mediocre guys, and then you can trade some of these mediocre guys and get, I don't want to say a star in DeAndre Hunter, but an above average player who is going to work to the strengths of both Garland and Mitchell, who are both superstars in this league. I think now, as a Celtics fan, I'm a little bit more worried. I still don't think we're too much. The Cavs are too much of a threat to us, but it's just kind of an interesting trade because that does really add that third. When you think of a contender out of either conference, you need like a big three kind of. We have the big two, and then the rest of our starters, I'd say, are all pretty much all stars. So when you add that third guy in Hunter, I think you really add another element to the game for the Cavaliers. And another trade that was really interesting Justin was talking about is what is going on in Canada right now. I can't tell. I mean, at 15-29, are the Toronto Raptors just all of a sudden now in win now mode? I don't get it. You add a vet in Nurkic. I mean, 30, clearly a vet. He knows what he's been around. He's been on Portland. He's been on all these teams. He knows what's going on. And then you add a certified bucket in Brandon Ingram, and you pair him with a team that's arguably one of the worst teams in the NBA right now. And I don't get it. Like, you think what? Now that you add a superstar and
is Nurkic in Toronto?
I don't
No,
get it.
Nurkic in Charlotte right when we got on the air.
Nurkic is on the Hornets. So
Here's my whole spiel on
Hornets.
Toronto.
Excuse me, my bad.
They operate, I think, in a different world than most NBA teams because it's so difficult for them to drive stars to Toronto. That property tax is not appealing to players in free agency. We've seen it time and time again. They really have to grow their team through the draft. And I think anytime in Toronto they can get their hands on any talent through a trade, they're going to take it.
It's a waste of talent. They're
No.
just. I mean,
But here's my
Nurkic is to Charlotte. I was reading that wrong. But still, like Brandon Ingram, I don't understand what's gonna happen. Like, you're gonna win another 5-6 more games and be second to last in the East instead of
they've got a lot of money tied up in what's like kind of a bunch of interesting guys, but it's just ultimately mediocrity, right? Like Scotty Barnes, great prospect. You got RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly, Pirtle, and Ingram all making like pretty substantial contracts. Like I assume it's just a buy low thing. I think the real issue with Toronto on Ingram would be whatever they decide to do in the offseason, right? If they give him 40-50 million in the offseason, then it's an issue. Right now, it's just kind of an experiment. But I think, I don't know, they've got to find a way to consolidate some of that. But real quick, I guess, because I gotta drop for a little bit. But there is a trade I wanted to get some thoughts on, because I know when we were talking about the Hunter move, love that for the Cavs. Like, I do think that's a real threat or makes them closer to a stronger threat to the Celtics. A move that I thought kind of went the opposite and just reeked of desperation was the Bucks and Wizards trade yesterday with Middleton and Kuzma. And I mean, I get Middleton's knees are kind of shot. He's there one night, he's not there the next, but it's one of those moves to me where it's the chemistry that Middleton gave you, like, is still better than whatever availability Kuzma might give you over Middleton, and Middleton's a better shooter. So I don't know. That's one of those trades where the Bucks, I feel like I've always had a healthy respect because they have Dame and Giannis, right? So you kind of have a certain level. Middleton, for me, ever since they made the Dame for Drew swap, that was the key to that trade, is if Middleton was going to be the Middleton that used to kill the Celtics, he was the guy that could go kind of toe-to-toe with JB, if we're being really honest, several years ago, not certainly not the last like 2 years or so. But that Middleton was like, okay, them plus Dame and everything else, that's a thing. But Middleton never got healthy until both of them were hurt in the playoffs last year, and then immediately had double ankle surgery. And now he's been, not himself at all here since he's gotten back. But Kuzma for Middleton, it reminds me a little bit of Celtics way back in the day here when we traded Perk for Jeff Green. It was like, listen, Jeff Green was the better talent, but the Perk continuity and the chemistry, that was the better option at that time. Like, no doubt Jeff Green was the better talent. Kuzma here versus Middleton, I think it's pretty equal, but then you lose the chemistry. I don't know. That's a move to me that just screams that Giannis might not be a Buck in about a year and a half. That's what that move told me. But I'd be curious to get your guys' thoughts on that before I got to drop off.
That trade's it's honestly interesting, like you said. I mean, Middleton's one of those guys that the last several years, I mean, he really hasn't provided much. And even when he was, honestly, kind of like a Celtic killer, he hit every single three he'd shoot against us. That's really all he gave, right? I mean, Middleton, he's kind of like the typical three and D, but no D. So it's just three. And the last couple of years, he's given nothing. And I think if you're Washington, you go out and you kind of take a chance on a guy like Middleton. Maybe he'll get his legs under him a little, and he won't turn into a Joel Embiid where he can't play for another 2 weeks after an injury. But yeah, I don't know. That's one of those.
You know what this move screams to me? This move screams because this is like, when we have a guy like Middleton, there's no market for Chris Middleton anymore, right? Like you've waited too long to move him. It was probably signing him to that extension in the offseason, I think was a move where it's like, okay, we can't lose this guy for nothing. He's going to get dealt at the deadline. So I think this move is just like, how can we stay relevant? Is there anything out there that can kind of keep talent on this team right now while staying relevant without completely and don't completely lose out? Because I think like Kuzma, he's good enough, right, where he can fill it from a talent aspect, he can fill a void, but he doesn't bring the unique, because Middleton's savvy, man. Like, he's been in the league a while, he kind of gets it. In terms of getting you a bucket, he's still there. He's honestly a very underrated playmaker when the ball is in his hands. So I do think you lose out on that aspect. I think you get a little bit from Kuzma. I think they get a little bit more size, a little bit more spacing. The
size and availability. That's he's having the worst shooting season of his entire career this year. So that's right. That's a tough
58% from the line. He is a
it's bad.
He's done. Seriously.
I mean, 28% from three as well. Like it's pretty brutal for Kuzma this year.
I don't see that move being a needle threading move for this team who has had such a I would label it horrific start. They've definitely come back down to earth a little bit, put together a very solid stretch with some easier opponents winning games that they should have won. But I think when you take a look at the whole Chris Middleton thing, yes, and Rob, we always say it on the show, the best ability is availability. And Chris Middleton has not been an availability guy, especially come playoff time when the Bucks really need him the most. And so I definitely think you're getting the availability with Kyle Kuzma for sure. But this isn't a move where I'm sitting here as a Boston fan, and I've seen some very tough emotions with this trade incoming from Bucks fans, where they're not too pleased with this. And essentially, you look at the culture of the Milwaukee Bucks and that championship team. Drew Holiday was already traded away. Chris Middleton already traded away. Brook Lopez, if you guys don't remember, Brook Lopez was on his way to Houston last free agency until the Milwaukee Bucks kind of swooped back in and matched the deal. And I think thank you very much, Will, for joining us. Thank you. I just think the culture standpoint of the Milwaukee Bucks in championship contending spirits is essentially gone. You still have Giannis. I think it's not fully gone as long as Giannis is on the team. But I think that championship kind of continuity is out the door for sure.
the window's gone definitely for the
I
Bucks.
do. I do think it's closed, and I will say it's very cracked because I will stand by saying as long as they have Giannis,
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
that window will always stay open. Just like with the Celtics, once it does come time to picking and choosing contracts with KP and Drew, and obviously Al's going to be retiring, I don't think the championship window will be fully closed as long as you have Tatum and or Brown. I do think the window will be open, but for the Bucks, and guys, remember this is something that I did bring up last trade deadline with the Milwaukee Bucks was this Bucks team is getting older, guys. Like we're going to start seeing some real moves. And now that Holiday's gone throughout the offseason, Chris Middleton's now gone. Obviously, Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton have been on the trade block for quite some time. I'd be very shocked if both those guys are still on this roster by 3 p.m. today. It's definitely the culture in Milwaukee is not what it was even last year. And that Kyle Kuzma move, even for Bucks fans, they know that was not the best of moves that they could have done this deadline.
Justin, what are you talking about? Culture of last year? Because I didn't see any culture in the Bucks last year.
Good to see you again
whatsoever. I mean, for real, last year was horrendous for the Milwaukee Bucks in every aspect of that season. I mean, when you hire Doc Rivers halfway through the season. You go and first of all, they messed up by trading Mike or not trading, rather firing Mike Budenholzer last year. And I understand he kind of ran his course in Milwaukee in terms of being the head coach there, and he probably would have been out of there in 2021 if the Bucks didn't win the championship that season. And ultimately, they did make a mistake, the Bucks, giving away Mike Budenholzer because. Mike Budenholzer, he was just a good head coach. Okay, he was a quality head coach. Whatever you want to say about his motivation behind the scenes, or did he run his course in Milwaukee? Well, ultimately, Mike Budenholzer was still a tremendous, phenomenal X's and O's head coach for the Milwaukee Bucks, and they still had a chance in 2022. In 2023, they were also the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, upset in the first round by the Miami Heat. But then they go and hire Adrian Griffin, who's just a complete disaster there because the team just didn't quite like him. I mean, Adrian Griffin wasn't a liked head coach in the locker room. I mean, it might not have been anything that he did in the X's and O's standpoint, but the players certainly weren't enjoying him, whether it was Bobby Portis, Damian Lillard, or Giannis. But we all know the mistake, too, was trading Drew Holiday to the Portland Trailblazers and then indirectly to the Boston Celtics for Damian Lillard last year. I think that would just completely blew up anything the Bucks had in terms of chances of winning the championship. But now it's just going far and far away because last year I think the Bucks they took themselves out of it in terms of contending again. Now you could say Giannis is there, always one of the best players in the league, but if you don't have the assets and players around Giannis Antetokounmpo to actually go out there and compete, well, they're not actually going to compete because we see the NBA is a lot better nowadays. You can't just pair up a big three, or you can't just rely on one superstar to do everything like you could in the 2010s or even the 2000s. It really is a very saturated league nowadays in terms of the talent everywhere. But this trade for the Milwaukee Bucks, I really think that they were trying to get rid of Middleton's money in a sense. And I think that, see, this is where I believe that this trade in particular, Kuzma is really the only thing you could get for Chris Middleton. And I don't think Middleton, I just didn't see the impact there with the Milwaukee Bucks. And for me, the Wizards, Middleton going to the Wizards now, they're saying, oh, we're going to keep Middleton because, he's going to be mentoring the young guys. Well, what about Malcolm Brogdon? What about Jonas Valanciunas this year? I mean, they haven't been able to do anything in terms of mentoring the young guys. They've had 2 different 16-game losing streaks this season. The Wizards have, and right now their record is putrid, and they have 7 wins on the year. Well, guess what? 3 of those are against the Charlotte Hornets. So it really paints a picture of how bad the Wizards are at this moment in time. And I don't think Middleton's going to do too much mentoring that's going to mean anything there, because Middleton's also been a player in the past that maybe he's learned in his NBA career, but it's also he's been a player that hasn't always given the best example of how to go in and practice hard and play hard. And even during the Bucks championship runs or even their playoff runs, it was a conversation that Middleton didn't always get after it within games. But now coming off double ankle surgery, Middleton isn't impactful to me anymore, and I really do believe the Bucks were trying to get rid of his money, and Kuzma's really the only thing that you can farm for Middleton's money at this point in time. So the Bucks, for as weird as this trade maybe looks on the outside for a lot of people, I actually think they did an okay job in their return of potentially just giving away Chris Middleton, because if Kuzma isn't out there, they potentially just give away Chris Middleton for next to nothing. And now Kuzma, I think we forget that Kuzma, he can be an impact player. He's not going to be a big three piece or anything for the Milwaukee Bucks. He's not going to be a needle mover for Milwaukee and them going and competing for a championship. But at the same time, I see Kuzma as a player that we've kind of forgotten about since he was traded to the Washington Wizards from the Los Angeles Lakers, because he did make an impact on that 1920 championship team with the Lakers. Now, of course, that team had LeBron and Anthony Davis, and they were super talented. KCP, Rajon Rondo, Dwight Howard, all those assets, or really all those players were on that squad. And now Kuzma, he is. We saw a quote come out from Kuzma a couple weeks ago, how he wasn't trying to fit in with the Washington Wizards. And look at that!
What the hell?
Celebration time, folks!
Celtics just
Celebration.
made
The Bucks are done. The
blockbuster
Bucks are
trade.
done in the East. It's all Celtic time now. But how about this?
What
How about
setting
this?
do you have on?
Hey, there we
Whoa.
go. There we go. Wait,
What else can you do?
maybe we can do one of these too.
Yeah, I don't. He doesn't know. I don't think. He
Yeah,
knows.
all
I don't
right,
know what
here we
setting
go.
he has
Can
on.
I get the balloons? Some people know what I'm talking about out here. The balloons.
But
I don't know.
Can I ship? Just I want to give my thoughts because I know you guys talked about it. It's a team out west, and it's Phoenix Suns. I really find it really hard to believe that we're going to see this same Suns team return after 3:00 p.m. today, which is just under a half hour away. This locker room reportedly is absolutely in shambles. It's dysfunctional. There's trade talk from the big three. And I heard earlier Xavier kind of threw out the, kind of don't be surprised if Devin Booker is either dealt or leaves this team. He's been through he's been through the absolute dog days of this franchise, and he's been through the greatest moments of this franchise in making the NBA Finals alongside Chris Paul. And now, obviously, being able to make a run with Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. And this team is dysfunctional. This team is screwed. I mean, 3 players, your big 3 is your entire salary. That is, they are one of the most financially horrific built teams I think I've ever seen. I really believe that.
Justin, when you go on to 2K and you're in the My League and you press somebody on the trade finder and you kind of scroll, and then for some reason Bradley Beal pops up, and you're giving up an 82 over. That's what Phoenix did. Their owner and their GM just went into the trade finder.
They saw the name.
And they saw the name and they thought, "Oh, this is awesome. This is gonna work." And how many GMs have been doing that? You need to build something in today's NBA. I mean, look at the past 6 champions. They've all built something.
I mean, if you want my honest opinion, I think Dallas should pull an Oklahoma City Thunder and just tear it down. I do. I believe they should tear it down, build from scratch, trade Kevin Durant for some young assets, for some trade assets. Bradley Beal essentially says he wants to stay in Phoenix. Him and his family love it in Phoenix, despite what's going on. I don't know how much I believe in that. But either way, I think from a business standpoint, that experiment failed majorly. Obviously, I believe they just traded Yusuf Nurkic. I'm at work, so I think I saw that over the phone.
Charlotte, yeah. Yep.
This is a guy who they also had high hopes for, and he fell completely out of the rotation to where he wasn't even getting minutes in blowouts. And obviously, like I just said, Bradley Beal is taken out of that lineup. Is Grayson Allen still over there? Because he has fallen off.
He is, yeah. I mean, at least I haven't heard any different, but yeah, I mean, I think he'll stay there probably, but yeah.
Obviously, when you look in the trade finder and you see a Kevin Durant a couple of years ago, you press the button. You see a Bradley Beal, you see the name Bradley Beal, you press the button. But they made the wrong moves. They traded away Cam Johnson. They traded away Mikal Bridges, guys who are now on
Ayton. Let's not forget Ayton.
Ayton? Absolutely. And I'm so happy he's doing well and expanding his game in Portland. You traded the wrong players if you're Phoenix. I am not their GM, but is Jones still their GM out there in Phoenix?
I think so, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
James
Now,
Jones, yeah.
listen, we were looking at James Jones. We were going, he's put together this pretty cool team. This pretty fun team. This guy is a very underrated executive. Turns out this is a horrendous team. And this is a horrendously constructed team because now it's very hard to build a roster when you don't have money to build the roster. You gave your entire salary essentially to 3 guys, Booker, Beal, and Durant. And these guys have not produced together when they are healthy on the court together. I think Phoenix should shut the thing down. I think they should pull what the Oklahoma. I know Oklahoma made it look so easy, but they realized, okay, this whole Chris Paul, this whole Carmelo Anthony, we bought the names essentially is what we did. They're not producing Paul George. We got to face the hard reality, trade them away, get some young assets, get some draft picks, and start from scratch. I think Phoenix should 100% pursue that because, listen, I'm sorry, I'm out on Kevin Durant. I've been out on Kevin Durant since Tatum swept him in the first round 3 years ago.
Well,
he's still a phenomenal talent, but he's not going to win. I don't think he's going to win you a title in the NBA right now. I don't. I'm sorry.
And you know what? Can we, if you're a GM, post 33, stay away from those guys. I mean, how many times do you have to see James Harden get on the move and now Kyrie Irving on the move and Kevin Durant on the move and Paul George on the move? And it's like it gets to a point where when you're a GM, you have to see it. Russell Westbrook's another one. You have to see it through. A player post 33 is not the same guy. He does not you look at the league right now and look at the past 6 champions. Really, I guess outside of that Lakers team, but still, I mean, Anthony Davis at the time was 27 years old, if I'm not mistaken, and was really, and again, Steph Curry, you're right. But the Nuggets, their top guy was a Nikola Jokic, who was 27. Giannis Antetokounmpo in the Bucks. He was in his prime. You have Kawhi Leonard was in his prime. Jason Tatum now in his prime. There is a clear indication right now in the league of what's working and what's not working. And for some reason, I get it. Money, you got to put asses in seats. Kevin Durant does that. Bradley Beal does that, right? But at some point, if you're a manager in today's league, you have to look at some of these players' age and be like, okay, it's not Kevin Durant is not worth sending out your future for. He's not. And now if you're Phoenix, right, say you decide, okay, you know what, this didn't work. This experiment's kind of toast. We're going to keep Beal because he's impossible to move, but we're going to move off of Durant and we're going to kind of be content with whatever happens for the rest of the year. Okay, now you're moving off Durant. How do you get anything back that is of value of what you traded for? You traded 5 first-round picks for Kevin Durant. You're essentially saying this is going to be a net negative, right? We're going to lose on this, right? We're not going to walk away with the championship. We're not going to walk away with the Western Conference Finals appearance, and we are going to not walk away with any future first-round picks. And where's your plan of attack here from Kevin Durant? And they failed. I mean, the Phoenix Suns failed miserably with this experience.
Would you say you'd agree with me in terms of Phoenix? Whether it's the style of the Oklahoma City Thunder, in some sort of fashion, they should just shut this down and say, you know what, we tried, it didn't work. Let's rebuild. Let's scratch this. Let's go about this professionally. And listen, Phoenix was in the dog days when they first got Devin Booker, and even before Devin Booker and the Tyler Ulis era. This team was struggling. I mean, they absolutely Jackson and Dragan Bender. Do you remember this? One of the draft busts in NBA history. I mean, this guy was picked early on, and we're thinking, oh my goodness, this is spectacular. And they failed year after year.
They failed the second 3 seasons ago. They won 64 games and were the 1 seed with a young, dynamic core, right? A core that obviously, and they got rid of them. Every single player they got rid of Cam Johnson. They got rid of Mikal Bridges was over there. Gosh, excuse me. DeAndre Ayton they got rid of. I mean, they had a core of young players that could have propelled them potentially, right? You sit on them, you wait. Maybe somebody comes through free agency. Maybe you draft a guy in the late. You wait, right? You have a team headlined by a very, very, very capable star in Devin Booker, and and you trade up all of that. You get rid of every good young piece you have to go for Kevin Durant. And then from there, right, you add Bradley Beal, and it's just you traded the wrong pieces. You do not trade. That is really like Boston in my eyes when they traded Mikal Bridges. It was like Boston giving up Derek White, or it's just like it was bad. It was. I mean, moves like that get GMs fired, and I think that GM deserves to be fired. I'm sorry.
It would be like the Thunder trading Chet for KD right now, like when they have all this talent put together.
Just a little update. I know this isn't trade news. I don't know if you guys covered this at all. I won't go into depth in it at all. It just came across my timeline. Anthony Davis will be out tonight, so he will be out. He's expected to make his season debut on Saturday at home against the Houston Rockets. So this was a game where he was coming in questionable too. Tonight, obviously, we'll have you covered for.
He was at Striga last night in Boston. He's in Boston right now.
Yes, he is. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
team, but he has been scratched from this game. So obviously, we'll have you covered for Celtics post game live tonight after the final buzzer. I'm sure we'll touch base on a few trades that have gone through after, because that seems to always happen whenever we end this show. A bunch of trades still fall through because 3 p.m. is the deadline, but some trades don't fall through until a little bit after. I believe if they are in the middle of the works of the trades, they are allowed to negotiate further. I do really quick kind of want to I was just looking at my phone and there was a trade that I wanted to kind of touch on. But
sure.
Cody Zeller just got traded to the Houston Rockets. Cody Zeller in a second-round pick. It is disclosed yet. It is not disclosed what the Hawks are getting in return, but I'm interested to see what the Hawks are going to do. In the last 20 minutes,
Hawks
obviously
have made like 3 moves.
Bogdanovich and Hunter being gone. I'm surprised Clint Capella hasn't been dealt. If he already hasn't, I haven't seen a Clint Capella deal come through. I do want to present this question for the Atlanta Hawks standpoint. Now, Luka Doncic, who the franchise of the Dallas Mavericks, the face of the franchise of the Dallas Mavericks, one of the greatest Mavericks already at the age of 25 to ever put on the blue uniform, was traded. Now he was in a much better situation out west, just coming off an NBA final, MVP candidate, of course, and they have a really good shot at going deep in the playoffs again out west. Do we see something going on with Trae Young, guys? Because am I still here?
Yep.
Oh,
maybe.
Oh, hello, folks.
Seamus and 2 cameras.
What a weird angle that was.
Right? Yeah.
Man. Do we see some major changes coming in? Because I get it. We're seeing Bogdanovich being shipped out. We're seeing Hunter being shipped out. I'm sure we'll end up seeing Clint Capella get shipped out. Obviously, DeJounte Murray got shipped out earlier in the year in the offseason. Does Trae Young, or what do we think about Trae Young? Is he going to be an Atlanta Hawk, whether it's by the deadline or the offseason? It's just weird. The situation in Atlanta, we talk about Phoenix being weird. I think Atlanta's weird because they've been mid for so long, as the kids say, mid. They have been mid for so long, and they've been a playing team. And they get this number 1 draft pick in a, with all due respect, in a draft class that you probably wouldn't have recognized him as the number 1 pick. Where do we see the Hawks kind of going from here, whether it's at this deadline or in the future?
I can start just because I've been a little quiet, so I just want to make sure I get some thoughts out for sure. I think this is definitely a good piece to add on to it. I think we all noticed too, the past 3 seasons, exactly, Trae Young has been, and you're probably not what I'm about to say, snubbed from the All-Star game, but he has that exact talent. He's had that talent since he's been with Atlanta. Obviously, he can be a little chippy at times with, certain franchises that he's been on the court with or in their arena. But, I just think that he's been their franchise, just like Luka was with Dallas. He's still there, going almost 7 or 8 seasons with them at least. I think at some point they're just like another one of those mediocre franchises, but they can probably step up within they're get a good playoff push going with some other teams. Like they brought to Boston a couple of years ago. They obviously beat New York a couple of years ago, or not New York, New York, and they also had beaten Milwaukee Bucks Oh, they lost to Milwaukee Bucks, but you know what I mean? Yeah, for Trae Young's standpoint, I don't know, like, his I don't know where he'll stand in a few years. I don't know. I don't see him leaving Atlanta anytime soon, though. But, I think it's just definitely something to look out for if, like, the team does obviously decide to keep, making all these big moves. I think that they want to see more of Reese Shea now that Johnson's out the rest of this year. I think he stepped up a little bit more with that. So, I think that Trae is still trying to find pieces to building around him, though. But as for him leaving, I'm 50-50 with it. I think he could, but also might not. But I think right now, obviously, he's not going to leave this season. But, give him a few more years and see how that goes. That's my take, at least. But, yeah.
I think, who would have been such a fun duo? And first of all, really happy, really excited for San Antonio. I mentioned it on the postgame show the other night. I think De'Aaron Fox is such a phenomenal fit in San Antonio. But I'd kind of like to see the duo of Trae Young and Victor Wembanyama. I think that
I was gonna say that. I was gonna say that the Fox trade kind of closes the door.
It definitely closes the door, and I do really like that duo tremendously. But if there's a guard in the NBA, that'd probably be the most fun pairing, in my opinion, is Wembanyama and Trae Young, who's been putting up Rondo numbers this year. I've seen some 2020 games out of Trae Young, and I'm not the biggest Trae Young guy at all. But I'm just, I don't know, if I'm a Hawks fan, man, I'm just scratching my head every year because it is just so frustrating and no moves have been made, and the moves that have been made aren't needle making moves. And when you have a guy like Trae Young, who is I'd say a perennial all-star superstar in this, tremendous, and you have a superstar this good and you don't surround him with talent, at least good talent, in a weaker Eastern Conference, that's very ultimately frustrating. That is very, very frustrating. And you're trying to compete, even not with Boston and New York and Cleveland. You're trying to compete with teams like right now, the middle of the pack teams like Orlando, Miami, Chicago, Indiana, like these teams that you're going to see at the bottom of the playoff picture in the play-in tournament. And Atlanta is not doing anything that shouts winning to me. And they're also not doing anything that shouts tanking to me. And to me, that's an issue. Being middle of the pack is the worst. Like, I remember when you guys remember the play-in season, the 2020, 2021 year, which, yes, it was a shortened year, but like, Rob, you and I started covering games that year together. It was putrid. Right. One second, and similar to the stretch that we just saw this past month for the Celtics, it's like, one game, we're hopping on the post-game show, and we're talking about how the Celtics look like they could easily go back-to-back. And literally 24 hours later, we're talking about a team that looks like they've never touched a basketball before in their life. And I don't know how Atlanta could live with such mediocrity for so many years, especially when they have an all-star and a superstar like Trae Young. And just in, Detroit is acquiring Dennis Schroeder from the Utah Jazz. I don't know if that was a buyout situation. I don't know if that was
part of the Jimmy Butler deal, I think they said, yeah.
Okay. Yep. Okay, so just wanted to get that out there, Sean. So you're going to see, even though it is the final 10 minutes of the trade deadline, you're going to see moves probably between now and 3:30 start to circulate around the league. Usually that's kind of the busiest time. But I don't know, because this trade deadline isn't like years before, as Seamus has mentioned many times. We're seeing a lot of trades 1, 2, 3 days before the deadline had actually occurred. And we're saying, whoa, save some for the deadline. But we're still seeing some significant moves being made throughout the association. So definitely, ratings are definitely up right now in this league, which sucks because, of course, the year Woj retired, this trade deadline is historic.
Hey, guys, I got to bounce, though. I got to be somewhere at 4, so I'll see you guys next time on the post-game show. Okay.
All
right, bye. See ya.
Does Seamus want to say something?
Oh, did you, Seamus?
Oh, no, I was saying, you were saying the ratings were up, Justin, across the league. They're up on here today. Trade deadline special day. They're very much up on the Celtics Talk Weekly network right now.
And they'll be even more up if we lose tonight. So,
because for some reason you guys only care when we lose. I'm joking. No, I'm like, so on Atlanta, they sold at the deadline, which is like kind of surprising, but also like if you're Atlanta, it's probably time to give this up. the Trae Young experience, because it's like maybe give another season or two, but I think right now Atlanta's got like Jalen Johnson is a very promising forward, and I think like it's weird because you have some bright spots, right? But then again, it's like okay, you trade Bogey today, you trade DeAndre Hunter today. What's your direction? I want to talk on this Terrence Mann deal, right, in Bones Highland for Bogey. From a Clippers standpoint, guys, do you remember also real quick, Bogey is the most Clipper of all time. It makes so much sense that he is like he is a 6-man flamethrower scorer that that added to the Clippers arsenal. How many do they have? Lou Williams, and then you get Norman Powell, and then
Gallinari is up there. Gallinari.
Right? Yeah, exactly. They had Gallinari for. I feel like just the Clipper. Oh my God, they have so many. I mean, Pat Bev is another
Nick
one.
He's
Jamal
right.
Crawford.
Yeah, Jamal. Yeah, I mean the list goes on. But if you guys remember, about 2 years ago at the deadline, Terrence Mann was like they were like he was untouchable. They were like, we're not trading Terrence Mann. There was so much news going around of potential Clippers trades, but the other team wanted Terrence Mann. The Clippers weren't willing to do that. I find it kind of ironic here. Fast forward 2 years, you give up Terrence Mann. And all you get back is Bogey. I don't know. I find that kind of ironic.
That's like it's not a bad return, I will say, for Terrence Mann, because Terrence Mann to me is well, he's not a young player anymore. A couple of years ago he was seen as more of a young player, but you look at Terrence Mann's age now, he's like what, 27, 28 years old at this moment in time. And I remember when I found out his age just a couple of weeks ago, I was actually pretty flabbergasted by it, because he's older than one would think across the league. But I do think Bogdanovic, I think he's a more skilled player than Terrence Mann in terms of his offensive game. But defensively, I think you might be able to say that Terrence Mann has a little bit of an advantage over Bogdanovic. And this trade, it's one of those trades that I believe the Hawks, I'm very surprised that they're selling at this moment in time. I am, because this sets the precedent for the Hawks
They're selling too heavily.
potentially going and selling Trae Young in the offseason, I would think, as you guys were just kind of talking about Trae Young. I think the Hawks right now, where they're at, I'm surprised they're selling some of their forwards, because they had a pretty versatile roster in my mind. And I really thought when we played the Hawks a couple of weeks ago, when they beat us in overtime. Now, what's so ironic about that is the Hawks went on a huge losing streak after that game, of course, and that could have been a part of that losing streak. The Celtics just didn't fumble the details down the stretch, but at the same time, I thought the Hawks in that game were actually a good basketball team. And even you saw the Hawks, they beat the Celtics twice this year. And I really thought the Hawks' versatility and their physicality and just their ability to switch specifically on defense. Now, I know Trae Young isn't the best defensive player whatsoever, but they really stacked a lot of good defensive players around Trae Young. And maybe there's in the future, I mean, to me, this move right here, where you're looking at the Clippers acquiring Bogdanovic from the Hawks, I really do believe that sets a precedent for, and let's actually mention this as well. DeAndre Hunter going to the Cavs. That's also
Right.
huge in this narrative as well. I think it kind of sets the stage for the Hawks to maybe move on from Trae Young eventually and just kind of set up and retool, because the Hawks at this moment in time, I've never been a huge Trae Young guy. At no point in time have I been a huge Trae Young guy. I just don't believe in your 1A star being somebody who can be all offense and no defense. That's
don't
just
think
not.
the-
I mean, if you need to mask your number one star on defense,
So the Lakers
I
made a
don't see how
mistake.
it's going to work. I really don't see how it's going to work whatsoever. And I really do believe in the future that the Hawks, they could be looking at the future going, okay, Trae Young, he's been here since 2018. We've had a shift of rosters around him. Now, the first couple of years of his career were rough from a standpoint of the record for the Hawks. They knew they were going to be bad. But then really they made the Eastern Conference Finals in 2021. And ever since that point, the Hawks have really underachieved. They really underachieved in every single season because that 2021 team, they beat the Sixers in the second round, beat the Knicks in round 1, and they actually went to 6 games against Milwaukee. Now, Giannis was hurt for part of that series, but at the same time, that Hawks team made a legitimate run in 2021. And the next season, they held legitimate expectations to be a top 3 seed in the East, to go back in, of course, Marcus Smart to the Washington Wizards.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. Wow. I just got that. The Memphis Grizzlies are trading Marcus Smart in a 2025 first-round pick to the Washington Wizards in a multiple team trade that sends 2 second-round picks to Memphis. Guys, now, if you remember correctly, Marcus was supposed to be heading to Washington, right, in that Kristaps deal before that fell through. So.
Okay. Well, the first thought that comes through my mind,
I'm sorry, that was Brogdon. I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I did. Well, the first thought that comes through my mind right now is, okay, buyout, right? Washington, go and buy out Marcus Smart, free agent, veteran minimum. He's back in Celtics green again, right? This is what's going to happen. Huh? I can see it. I mean, why not? Why not? I mean, I'm like, why not? What is he mad? Like, also Kevin Porter Jr. to the Bucks for Marjon Beauchamp, which is whatever deal, honestly, for me. But in terms of Marcus Smart, I'm just gonna say this right now. I can kind of see him back in Celtic green, unless he's really mad.
Stop it! Stop
it! Unless he's really mad. Okay, like if he is bought out by the Wizards, okay, and goes and joins a contender. Why wouldn't we welcome back into the Celtics organization? Because we traded him.
No, hear me out. And I love Marcus, but he's
not going to have as big of a role, that's for sure.
But
he's going to be back in his
16-17
role.
Can you have a guy of Marcus Smart, who was last time he was here, who was viewed as the third member of the big 3? He was the heart and soul. He was fan favorite. He was kind of like he was the starting guard. And you think he's going to come back to Boston? And what? That's just all out the window.
There's no way Brogdon wasn't involved in that trade, right? Like, have the details dropped on that?
What we have so far is it's Memphis to Marcus. In a first to Washington in a multi-team deal, in a second goes to Memphis. The other team is not stated.
Oh my God!
Yet.
Hopefully it's Boston. We just sent Tillman back to Memphis. That'd be sweet.
We have another trade here. Now it's going to start to pick up. Here we go. Los Angeles Clippers are trading Kevin Porter Jr. to the Milwaukee Bucks in exchange for Marcin Beauchamp.
Patterson. Celtics extend. Wow. Can you believe that? Wow. I thought Smart in Memphis, although he hasn't been able to stay healthy with them, I thought that was a really good culture fit for them, man. Who did they get in return? Is that we don't know yet, do we?
That's still to be found out.
Okay.
Well, no, we do. We do know what Memphis got. Memphis got a second-round pick back from Washington.
Yeah, they got a third grader. Okay, but they didn't get a player?
No, they gave up a first and Marcus Smart to get rid of him.
So they're getting rid of his money. So that's the thing. They're getting rid of his money right here. They're getting rid of Marcus Smart's money. So I'm under the impression that the Wizards are gonna go ahead and
buy him out.
Yeah, and then he's free agent.
Can you believe Marcus Smart turned into a potential buyout player? Man.
I'm just saying, like, Celtics reunion with Marcus Smart, I really don't think he would have that big of a role. Like,
and this is the fundamental problem. Wait, I'm sorry, but like, this was the fundamental problem of which Marcus Smart's role on the Celtics was. Marcus Smart is a year and a half removed from his role in Boston, and now he is essentially in a buyout candidate market. And he was playing 40 minutes a game in the playoffs, taking the third amount of shots in a game 6 to potentially go back to Boston to extend what was one of the most historic comebacks in NBA history. He was the one taking the shot. That's my point, whereas there is such a fundamental dysfunctional relationship between the player Marcus Smart and the person Marcus Smart. Right. Smart was never as good to play the role he did. He was never good enough to do the things he did.
Could Boston even get him? Because aren't we very deep into the tax apron? Like, we can't do buyout candidates, or is there certain buyout candidates?
I believe
7,
so. if we wanted Marcus Smart, Franco,
What are
already
you
late.
doing,
3
Franco?
o'clock.
Rob's talking. What are you doing?
And it's also 3 o'clock. You've missed that.
The
What
bells
a
have
twat.
rung.
He is such a twat.
The bells have rung. Welcome.
Hey, at least
See
the
that?
camera
Is
hasn't
that
fallen.
is that an acceptable word?
Twat.
Yeah.
Isn't it like a British version of like an idiot?
How is it?
I don't know. I
You gotta
hear
be
British
careful.
people
Myers
say it.
Leonard out here had no idea what he was saying.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah, that's true. How about Franco's an idiot? How's that?
Yeah, I was gonna say I wouldn't dabble in any of that.
Franco's an idiot.
No, but I mean, look, seriously, it's like here he is. But on your question, so Boston, their cap situation with the apron and the buyout market, they can sign anybody and any contract that got released if it's a minimum deal, right? Because the Springer deal gets them off the contracts. And that was a move needed. So they could sign anybody, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, as long as it's a minimum. Now, if they want to go above the minimum, they cannot go anywhere. They can't touch any player that was making above
So it's
that.
very we can. It's
mid-level.
just very limited.
Yeah.
Right.
And
it's not very
James
realistic.
Wiseman just got traded to the Toronto Raptors for cash considerations from the Indiana
torn
Pacers.
Achilles.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't even think he's going to even suit up this year, right? Isn't he out for the year?
No. Yeah, he's done.
And that was like the first game of the year, I think, or at least like the first week. Yeah, I remember watching that. Yeah. So we're going to see trades roll through here in the final few minutes, but man, Smart trade deadline buzzer beater from the Grizzlies. That's interesting. I'm interested to see because it does say multi-team deal. So I'm interested to see what other teams were involved. I'm interested to see what assets, what players were sent in and out. That's interesting. And it as of right now, it's looking like the Celtics are done making moves unless there's a trade in the works right now, a little past 3 that they haven't completed yet. So I believe that the Celtics are expected to focus on the buyout market to add on the roster. They can't sign any player who's made above the mid-level exception. That is per Gary Washburn. So it looks like the Celtics are staying pat for the remainder of the trade deadline and will look into the buyout market, as Rob was just saying, with the minimum deals that they can make. They do have 2 open roster spots. Technically, logically speaking, the Celtics only have 1 if we're going to go by what Brad Stevens prefers to do. He's kind of been notorious for leaving an open roster spot for this team. Seamus, I specifically ask you because you're pretty good with this type of stuff. Is there a deadline in which two-way players are allowed to be signed with? Because I know they can't, after a certain amount of games, they're not eligible to play in the NBA. Is there is there a certain amount of time we could call up Drew Peterson, JD Davison, Anton Watson before the playoffs so they can suit up for the playoffs?
There may be a deadline for the playoffs, but I'm not certain because I know in years past we've talked about bringing up players literally at the last moment before the playoffs. So I'm not entirely sure on the deadline for the playoffs. But I'm fairly certain we can convert players for the rest of the season. Obviously, when the playoffs come around, that's a much different story. But I'm not exactly sure about the deadline. But let me do some research.
I mean, obviously,
just real quick, here's some news out of Boston from Gary Washburn. The Celtics are expected to focus on the buyout market to add to their roster. However, they cannot sign any player who made above the mid-level exception, 12.8. Now, can I just say
I just read that word for word, Rob. I just read dude.
Are you serious? It's been a long day, man. I'm
saying
sorry.
it, you're a twat.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Hey man,
I'll
listen,
take the consequences. Oh man.
All right. Well, so can I just say something then? Sorry, my fault. I was checked out. I was scrolling through Twitter. On Twitter, I'm reading everybody like, "Oh my God, Celtics sit on their hands. They don't do anything. This and that." Like, can I just being a team that doesn't need to make a move at the deadline
is a luxury.
is a good thing.
Yeah.
being a team that doesn't have to scramble and reshift and reconstruct their roster or introduce a high volume player into the rotation, that's a good thing. Very few times in NBA history have trade deadline trades really made an impact that go deep into the playoffs. That doesn't happen really. The teams that are standing pat at the deadline are the teams that you're confident in. And I like, can we like stop? Like, it's a good thing Boston doesn't need to make a move right now, and they didn't make a move, right?
Here's my turn.
There we go. So breaking
the
news:
official
the
tweet.
Celtics are expected to focus on the buyout market to add to their roster. They cannot sign any player who made above the middle exception. That is the first time we're reading this. The first time that we're seeing this.
So,
Yeah, just in case you guys didn't hear about it.
does
Who's
anybody
gonna-
have any
the
buyout
buyout market?
candidates on the top of their head? So I'm assuming if Chris Middleton gets bought out, we can't go after him. If
No.
Marcus
PJ
Smart gets
Tucker.
bought out,
PJ
Ew.
Tucker.
I don't want him.
No,
Yeah.
PJ Tucker.
No, you
PJ
want him?
Oh yeah, I love PJ Tucker. Are you kidding me? He can go in there, muck things up. He's a great spacer, sit in the corner. He's a diver to the rim. He's a switchable guy. He brings a lot of intensity. Yeah, I would love PJ. He's been there before.
96
He's
years
won.
old, Rob.
That's fine. Play him out. Listen, you're not going to get a guy in the buyout market that's going to be a rotation guy.
No, I agree. I agree.
So he's a guy that you can go to in the playoffs. You're not going to play him a lot, kind of like a Blake Griffin type of guy. Really in that same type of role where he comes in, mucks things up, grabs a couple key rebounds, knocks down a couple corner threes, and he can. And I think he can, play some switchable defense. So, like, yeah, I mean, if we sign PJ Tucker, I'd be happy. I'd be happy about that. I wouldn't be mad.
That'd be pretty. I mean, and you bring in that kind of intensity that we kind of talk about. You remember in these recent post-game shows when the Celtics have kind of gotten into some kind of trash talking, little physicality. Celtics lack that. They really do. They lack kind of that eagerness, I feel like, in that department. So I guess, yeah, PJ Tucker would be a guy that could fill that void for you, if you call it a void. That's if Toronto ends up waiving him. I mean, Toronto is so weird at this deadline. I don't know if they'll waive him or not. But yeah, I mean, this was a fun deadline, guys. Like, this is a
Yeah.
and also to go off Rob's point, like, there's not much you really could have done in this deadline in terms of like trading, and it's going to be almost down to the last decimal in terms of matching contracts, and really the only two guys that you'd look at and say is Xavier, Tillman, and Springer, and one of those two guys were traded, and there's really not much you could do after Tillman and Springer. These are two guys who aren't really getting minutes, at least consistently anyway. They're not really going to get minutes come April, May, and June. And essentially, even if you were to trade for a guy, if you do trade for a guy and you get a guy in replace of those two, they're most likely also not going to be playing in the postseason either. It's going to be a guy really filling in minutes for Al Horford, Kristaps Porzingis, Drew Holiday when we get down to the last couple weeks in April before we start the playoffs. So there was really not going to be a huge move to be made for the Celtics. Now, obviously, looking into the buyout market, there are definitely a handful of players. I'm sure we'll get the list to tonight. I'm sure we'll touch on it for sure post-game live tonight after the final buzzer against Dallas. I'm sure we'll touch base on a few buyout candidates once they're listed. But I think the Celtics are in a tremendous spot right now. I do think Hunter to the Cavaliers made this a little bit more interesting in terms of making the competition a little bit more tougher for Boston in the Eastern Conference. But that's a good thing. I said this is a move that Joe Mazzulla is sitting at home and he's smiling at. He's excited for that. Joe loves the competition, and the Celtics love the competition, and they really need the competition. So this was a really good trade deadline for the NBA. I really do believe that. We saw a lot of things getting shaken up. We saw a lot of moves that, if they were going to happen, they'd happen in the offseason when nothing is really going on, and when you can really go in and go through training camp and preseason with their new teams and new players, get them acclimated. So it's a fun trade deadline, and I'm happy the Celtics didn't overdo it at the same time, because if they were to make moves, they would have had to be big moves. due to the salary cap and second tax apron. So I'm happy the Celtics were able to kind of stand pat and play it safe. Why trade a guy like Drew Holiday and or Kristaps Porzingis or even a Sam Hauser, Peyton Pritchard off the bench when you don't need to? So I think the Celtics did a really good job this season. Also, I think cleared up about 15 million in cap space. I think with that move,
Huge.
with that Springer move. So really, really solid trade deadline overall, guys.
Yeah, that will be huge in the upcoming years, especially with how tight the Celtics CBA cap is going to be in the next off season or two. There's going to be some chances that the Celtics can't even sign a minimum level player when in 2 years when they're trying to rebuild their roster. We're going to be looking at a lot of dependency on our draft picks to be able to contribute to our team and be able to jump right in from development in the G League up to the main roster and be contributors. But I think that the buyout market will definitely be interesting. Obviously, a lot of names will be announced within the next few days. Usually, the buyout market takes like a week or so to settle in. We'll be seeing names like Ben Simmons, who the Celtics aren't going to be able to acquire, unfortunately, because he is well over that $12.5 million MLE. He's making around $40 million per year from the Brooklyn Nets. So that's a big chunk of change coming out of Brooklyn's pocket just to get him off their team. So I think a lot of teams like the Atlanta Hawks, I don't think they got too much worse, and I don't see them as a selling team. However, I saw them readjusting their roster so they can focus on Shea and having a younger team around him, and also putting some depth behind Dyson Daniels and Trae Young. I think that the real big shakeups really happened on the Western Conference, and it's definitely a much more competitive conference over there than it is over in the East. However, with the Cavaliers improving, getting DeAndre Hunter on their roster, Knicks have made a couple of small moves, and we noticed a couple of other small moves like Toronto developing some players around them. I think Toronto is just really a location where if a team is trying to sell, they can sell to the Toronto Raptors, which happened with the New Orleans Pelicans. I feel like it wasn't because Brendan Ingram going to the Toronto Raptors was the best fit per se. It was just one of the only places that could send in that contract. But you look at
Great gesture. I'm on my phone.
yeah. But yeah, I think the Raptors were really just eating up players that needed to be traded, like PJ Tucker, Brendan Ingram, and the Pelicans were able to get a center with Olynyk, which was a dire need for him going forward. But I don't see too many teams that got too much worse after the trade deadline.
You know what shocked me the most, guys, about this trade deadline? It was the Orlando Magic who didn't make a single move. This is an Orlando Magic team.
Good.
What
No,
about
yeah,
what
good.
about another team that also did not make a move at this deadline? I will say that I have actually queued up in here real quick. If I can get to the tab.
Well, just
Here
while
we
you look on
go.
that, just to Orlando Magic.
Oh no, that's not it.
There's that friggin' buyout market.
Nope. Hey, there we go.
Gary Washburn getting plugged
Wait,
today.
we're a mess. Okay.
All right, I'll just talk about the Magic for a second.
Go ahead.
The Orlando Magic, this is a team where, yes, they were riddled with injuries this first half of the year, but when it's all said and done and you look at the construction of this Orlando roster, it's not such a bad roster on paper, but they lack severe shooting. And sometimes, guess what? It comes down to shooting. Can you make shots? And the Orlando Magic are not a team that could consistently make shots. I was very, very shocked that the Orlando Magic did not go through with any trades whatsoever. I'm gonna have to talk to Oscar because Oscar must be going through it right now over at the Magic Report.
But like,
this is an Orlando team that for the past couple of years, specifically in the shooting department, it's held them back from some pretty good opportunities. And they paid KCP that contract this summer, which I thought was going to be a really good deal for them. And turns out he's really not having a good year. I believe they still have Gary Harris on the team, and Jonathan Isaac as well, who was a terrific defender. But just all these contracts, I was very shocked at the Orlando Magic. And again, there was no move that I'm going to sit here and say, oh yeah, this puts Orlando over the top. This puts Orlando in contention. But in terms of just where they're at now in the construction of the roster, Orlando to me was one of the shocking teams that decided to stay pat at the deadline.
Well, I think if you're Orlando, patience is your key. Your two stars are 22 and 23.
Right,
you're in the starting up stages. I'm sure could they have better shooting? I agree. Yeah, maybe a move here or there, but like this year is going to be such an anomaly that that franchise is going to look back at in their next decade of what they have in store, just from the injuries and just the inability to get both Franz and Paulo and Cole Anthony and just everyone on the court at the same time.
Yeah.
So, I see what you're saying, but you do got to look at Orlando and think to yourself, okay, good, right? They didn't jump the gun. They didn't make any big moves. They understand what the direction is.
I don't think there would have been a big move to make anyway. I don't think they're a big move away anyway. Ian keeps sending links, and I can't read the links. So if somebody
Oklahoma City Thunder will waive Daniel Tice.
Oh my God! Oh, Seamus, let's recreate our trade deadline special. Let's recreate. We got Tice. I don't know.
Oh my goodness, he's coming back. He's coming back.
Tice, baby.
Well, you know what the trade we haven't talked about? You know what the trade we haven't talked about?
Wait, I want to throw up this real quick. One second.
Right.
1 second, because it's on the topic of teams that didn't make a move. The Nuggets made no moves at the deadline. So the Nuggets, who earlier this season looked like, could they make a roster move? Could they not? They do not make a roster move.
There was some buzz that Porter Jr. was going to get put on the move there. So
yeah, I was just going to ask you what
Porter
player was
probably.
Well, so here's my thing with Denver, right? And I've said this before. Like, Denver is the definition of they are so good. They are okay with whatever happens next. This is a franchise that has really never really had the luxury of being a big market team. They're just big enough. And here they are. They drafted in the second round during a Taco Bell commercial, some fat, goofy white guy, right? Turns out to be probably the next. It's fine. I'm a fat, goofy white guy. He turns out to be the next coming of Michael Jordan for this generation, right? And then here they come. They win a championship out of really just no one knows how it happens. The emergence of Nikola Jokic, right? Here that they've kind of sat pat recently, right? They haven't done anything. And this manager, right? This ownership group, they're content with where they're at. They're content with their one championship in Denver. They understand that as long as they have Jokic, they're going to sell tickets, they're going to sell jerseys, and they're probably going to compete at least in the second round of the playoffs. So, I'm not surprised. Like, Denver is a team that really has overachieved with what they got. And, whatever happens with Denver, as long as they have Jokic, I think they're completely okay with.
Well, that's like we talk about Giannis. Like, all these roster moves can happen around them, good or bad. I think you always have something if Jokic is on the team.
Right.
Just like I said with Giannis, like, yes, I do think the Bucks are regressing. I do think they're aging. But I do think the window stays open as long as you have Giannis. Same thing with the Celtics. As long as they have Jason Tatum, I think the window is still open.
Right. I think Milwaukee is a little bit different just because they've struggled a little bit more post-championship era. There has been more post-championship era window by 2 seasons, but I agree. Like, anytime you have Giannis, you don't know where you can go because, he gets hot come April, right? And all of a sudden you find yourself in the Eastern Conference Finals for a season. So, no, I agree. As long as you got Giannis, as long as you got Jokic, as long as you got Tatum,
being in the East might help with the Giannis thing too. No, obviously, we're in the East, so we probably shouldn't talk down the East. The East has significantly gotten better throughout the years, but as long as you're also not only as long as you're Giannis, but if you're in the East and you have teams like Atlanta and them behind you, I think the Bucks would be just fine.
Yeah, for sure. So, but from the Denver standpoint. I think right now, like they're playing good. Like it's again, like it's just Denver. They're just good enough, right? They won that title, and they let Bruce Brown walk. They let KCP walk. Kind of, in my opinion, two statements from the organization where they don't really care right now on spending too much money. They're going to pay Jokic. They're going to have their co-star next to Jokic, and then from whatever happens from there, they don't really care much. I don't think they felt a move needed to be made. Westbrook's been playing off the bench.
Yep.
They're selling tickets. They got a shot. I think this is the Denver Nuggets you're going to see for the next 5 years, where they're really not making any noise. They're relevant every year. They're in contention every year. And, I think that's what to expect with Denver.
Marvin Bagley is going to the Grizzlies in that deal. I just that just came across the phone. And Jordan Davis, I think I just read.
So
as well. Yeah.
If you're a non-Celtics fan, it's a nothing deal.
So also just going back to the Tice thing real quick. For the Tice to Boston, back to Boston, it's kind of memes because it's just like, oh, he's always around. But I think when you look at the construction of the Celtics roster, I definitely would rather play him over Tice in terms of just like he knows the Celtics culture and Tice. He gives you more than Tillman in my opinion. But
so can I ask you something, Justin? In the buyout market, because there's 3 names right now to watch: Tice, Kyle Anderson, Torrey Craig. Would you prefer Boston?
No. I'm just saying. I just feel like it's like Tice.
Well, no, but like
always
because
connected to Boston.
I think Tice is I would if we signed Tice, I'd be like, oh, this is a good acquisition. But for you, would you prefer? Would you prefer to go the big man direction or the forward direction?
No, and I was getting it. Yeah, so I was getting to that because the whole big man radio boy. Hold on, the whole big man thing.
That's
I was gonna say, as long as you have Tillman and Keita and Cornette, Porzingis, and Horford, that's five rostered centers, 5 rostered big men. I don't think you
4.5.
Just the percentage, just like
yeah.
I don't think it's useful if you add Daniel Tice to the Celtics. I would definitely play him over Xavier Tillman for sure, 110%.
And
but also,
in the playoffs, I'd play him over Keita.
Absolutely. But just with the construction of the roster, I think the Celtics would love an extra wing, obviously missing out on Lonnie Walker. Torrey Craig has been a player on my radar for a little while. I would love to see Torrey Craig if that ever was able to happen. The whole thing with slow-mo, man, is like, he was a good, solid piece. I just don't think he gives you that crazy amount of I don't think he gives you much. I think Torrey Craig can give you some better offense than Kyle Anderson. Anderson probably a good physical, kind of like PJ Tucker, muck up the game. But out of those 3, my choice would be Torrey Craig. But also the homer in me says bring Daniel Tice back home. I was super excited. I don't know. I was super excited when Daniel Tice came back home a couple years ago and made that finals run with us in Golden State. Thought he filled his role in well there. Obviously, a way less significant role than his first stint in Boston, where he actually found himself to be our starting center for a little bit. I don't know, though. I don't know. I also, you look at a team like the Golden State Warriors, who are in desperate need of a center. And although Tice is a undersized center, he can also space the floor out pretty well. So I also, if Tice ended up in Golden State, that wouldn't shock me. And it doesn't look like Chicago is moving on from Nikola Vucevic, which is, to me, extremely surprising. I thought he was a lock to be traded out, especially with Levine leaving and DeRozan leaving in the offseason. But I don't know. When you give me those 3 names that you just listed, Rob, you have 2 open roster spots. One of them, in my opinion, Torrey Craig. Drew Peterson drops lobster rolls and picks up the clam chowder. But I think you go with Torrey Craig. I wouldn't hate the Daniel Tice acquisition, but with how this roster is constructually,
I agree.
I don't see Tice being realistic. Then you have 5 rostered big men's.
What do you think about that, Franco? Do you go big man or do you go forward?
I think 3-and-D wing is almost essential. There's a lot of situations where Sam Hauser is in, and we've seen improvement in his efforts on the defensive end. He is always just still a targeted player on the court, especially when the second unit comes in. I think that we're gonna see a lot more of maybe like a Torrey Craig or a player that I was eyeing before the trade deadline was Javonte Green. And I feel like with the New Orleans Pelicans' recent moves, he's still a very high potential candidate to be on the buyout market. So I would look at players like that, but definitely a 3-and-D wing, and then the player that I'm always looking forward to, or was looking forward to, was a player like Lonnie Walker. But I don't know what's going to be going on with that, especially with the buyout market coming together. I think that he'll definitely, his name will start to pop up a lot more in rumors, and I think it's a pretty not surprising that the Celtics didn't make a move, but I think we'll be seeing some value come up, especially during the off season with that Jaden Springer great
Lot,
TP.
lot of former Celtic players on the move. I mean, you see Schroeder, which made that egregious comment on the NBA trade deadline, and then hours later he was traded. Marcus Smart on the move, Daniel Tice on the move. A little bit surprised Javonte Green wasn't on the move, just based off the talks. But a lot of former Celtics floating around the league at this deadline.
We haven't talked about really two big trades that I want to talk about. First one being De'Aaron Fox, guys.
Love that trade for
so Fox. So this is like my thing, right? It felt like Trae Young in a Victor Wembanyama not reunion, sorry, but a pairing was like meant to be, right? You know, here you have Trae Young. This is just this guard that kind of lacks defensive ability, that needs a back of a big man to kind of to lean back on. And here's Wemby, who kind of needs a playmaking shooting guard to kind of, run the offense, to continue that lob threat and to allow him the space. And then they go Fox, who I'm like thinking about. It's like, okay, well, here comes De'Aaron Fox, who's this kind of two-way playmaker who can score and light you up for 50, right? So it's like, what do you guys think of this move? Because between Fox and Young, I'm always going to lean Fox because of what he can do defensively that Trae Young can't. You pair him with Wemby, and all of a sudden you have a duo that now in San Antonio, talk about the rich getting richer, right? I mean, this is a duo that can propel you into deep playoff runs for the next 6 years.
It was, I think it was a multi-team trade, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, Yep.
It always shocks me a little bit when not so rivals, but when two conference teams who are in the race against each other make significant deals like this. And I was a little bit surprised that, although I love the pairing, one of my favorite trades of the deadline, underrated trade at the deadline. A little bit surprised Sacramento agreed to let De'Aaron Fox go out to San Antonio and pair up with Victor Wembanyama to be one of the, more young, springy, for the future duos in this league. And a little bit of a head scratcher for me that Sacramento would allow this to a team where they're competing with in the standings. San Antonio has fallen a little bit behind in these last couple of weeks, but this is certainly a move that could reignite the flame that San Antonio had earlier in the season. So a little bit surprised that Sacramento made this deal with San Antonio.
Well, this trade deal, I believe, sets up the San Antonio Spurs for the future. And what I find funny is about some of these deals. Ultimately, you see star players going from place to place, but they're actually going down in the standings. Jimmy Butler, he went from a 7 seed to a 10 seed, and then De'Aaron Fox, he goes from an 8 seed to now, I believe the Spurs are either 11th or 12th in the Western Conference.
Yep.
right now. So we're seeing actually stars go down in the standings, but these are more moves for the future. Now the Warriors, they actually want to turn it on this year more so than say the Spurs. But the Spurs, this is certainly a move for the future. And De'Aaron Fox and Wemby together, that this is a move that you look at the Spurs and go, they are ready to compete with Victor Wembanyama. They're not ready to, they're not preparing to lose more and more and more and more. We've seen teams of the past really make that mistake with star players when they finally gain those star players on the roster, finally harbor those star players, or I should say, rookie star players when they have those generational rookies, right? They'll just kind of fool around with them. You didn't think about Anthony Davis in New Orleans. It was like, oh, they keep losing, they keep losing, they keep losing. And there are a lot of other star players out there like that where they get into a situation across the league. They're great right away, and then the team just kind of wants to keep losing in order to pair other young star players around them through the draft. Well, Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs, they're not going through that at this moment in time because De'Aaron Fox, I would really say in this trade deal that the Sacramento Kings, I kind of like their return for De'Aaron Fox, considering the fact they actually acquired Zach LaVine. Now, I will say I don't know where Sacramento wants to go because they're just building onto their eight seeded squad. They go from De'Aaron Fox to Zach LaVine. I think Zach LaVine, you see out east, the Bulls are a perpetual 9 or 10 seed, and now you have Valanciunas too traded to the Sacramento Kings from the Washington Wizards, and that deal. And you really look at DeRozan, Levine, Valanciunas, almost sounds like DeRozan, Levine, and Nikola
It's
Vucevic
literally
on the
just
Chicago Bulls,
recreated
who
the
are a
Bulls now.
perpetual 8, 9, 10 seed. And that's what the Kings are that's where they're kind of going right now. And I understand why Fox would want a different situation in the NBA at this point in time, especially after the Kings fired Mike Brown. I have no idea what Fox really thought of that or not. But I would say the Kings' return was okay. But at the same time, the Chicago Bulls, they gave the Sacramento Kings, Zach LaVine. And I think in that 3-team deal, I think the Spurs made out phenomenally because they didn't give up. Now, they gave up some draft capital for sure. They gave up that 2031 Minnesota pick, which could be substantial in the future. You never know. But they gave up some nice draft capital in that trade, the San Antonio Spurs did. But in terms of players, I mean, Zach Collins, Trey Jones, I mean, I really don't. I don't see any like you don't see any of the young players coming out of San Antonio going, oh, whoa, they had to give up. I mean, they weren't going to give up Stephon Castle, I don't think, for De'Aaron
No.
Fox, but somebody like Devin Vassell, certainly a name that could have came up in that deal. And you just didn't see any of those names come off the board. So San Antonio really made out in terms of not giving up any of their young talent right now and still acquiring talent that's going to help all of their players still on the roster. And they did give up some draft capital, I do think. But the Kings, I think they had a nice return in this deal, getting Zach LaVine back for De'Aaron Fox at the end of the day and a couple of picks. But the Bulls, I look at the Bulls in this deal and I go,
What are
okay,
you doing?
what was going on here? Because I don't see anything the Bulls really got in this deal that I'm super fascinated with whatsoever. I mean, you look at I'm looking here. Do we have the ticker up here on the Zach LaVine trade? I don't know, but regardless, I'm looking at what the Bulls got in return
Barely any
is
pick.
Zach Collins and Zach LaVine. Like going back on the Zach LaVine point really quick. Zach LaVine is a good player. He could actually add to a championship level squad somewhere. I don't think he's going to be your number one, but could he be your number two or number three? I think certainly so. And his contract is big, but we're seeing the number go up and up and up for all these contracts. And I believe Zach LaVine, he could be a player somewhere down in the future. Maybe the Kings. The thing with the Kings is you think, oh, they're going to potentially sell Zach LaVine in the future, but I don't. The Kings have actually wanted Zach LaVine ever since he was a restricted free agent a long
Right.
time ago, almost 10 years ago now. So I think they're actually going to hold on to Zach LaVine in this situation. But I don't know where the Kings are going. I do like the return of Zach LaVine as an asset. I do believe he can be a player that's a second or third best player on a championship level team. He's a great scorer. He's of course a great shooter. He's one of the best shooters in the league. Doesn't get enough credit for it whatsoever. I think it's because of the Bulls' record and where they're always at in the standings. But yeah, I just don't agree with the Chicago Bulls giving up Zach LaVine to the Sacramento Kings for what their return was. It just I would rather just keep Zach LaVine. I don't know what the Bulls are trying to do because they didn't move on from Nikola Vucevic. They have Kobe White still on the roster. I have no idea what the Bulls are trying to do at this point in time. I think they got worse by giving up Zach LaVine. But if you're going to tear the house down, tear the whole house down. You don't just tear half the house down and leave the living room. You don't tear half the house down and leave the kitchen. That's what the Chicago Bulls are doing right now. They go, okay, Vooch, you stay here, but everybody else, they're gone. So the Chicago Bulls, they're one of those perplexing teams. I think the Kings are too in this deal, but the Spurs, they're the clear winners. They didn't give up anything quite substantial other than draft capital that they could look at later on down the line and go, oh, that would have been nice to have, but hey, we got De'Aaron Fox out of this deal. And I think the Spurs are making the right moves, going out and really putting pieces next to Victor Wembanyama in a time period where they need to be doing so, because Victor Wembanyama, he's on the rise right now. He is on the rise. He's already one of the best defensive players in the NBA. He's already, if you look at all the advanced stats, he's almost an MVP caliber player already. And that's scary considering he's still half a decade away from his prime. Victor Wembanyama, he was one of the more hyped draft picks in a long time. Well, I should say since Zion Williamson, and before that, maybe Anthony Davis, and then before that, LeBron James. But Victor Wembanyama, he's living up to all of that hype. And right now, the Spurs, they can't dilly-dally with all this losing. They can't be down in the standings in the Western Conference with Victor Wembanyama, because we always know the clock is ticking on some of these young players. I know the Supermax exists nowadays, but the clock is always ticking when it comes to, is this player, does he want out? Does he want another situation? Oh, he's tired of losing here. Is he going to force his way out? So the Spurs, they made a tremendous deal at this deadline, acquiring De'Aaron Fox from the Kings, who, again, just not really sure what their direction was. Still like their return for the Fox deal, but I'm not really sure what they're trying to do with the roster.
The second De'Aaron Fox that got put up on the market, that's the ticket. 27 years old, De'Aaron Fox. That's the big trade deadline ticket. That's your golden ticket right there. If you're a team, I mean, outside of Luka Doncic, who I don't count because of how lucky and how obscure and how ridiculous that is. But I mean, if you're a team in the NBA and you, in 27-year-old, just entered his prime, De'Aaron Fox puts up on the market, right? That is the guy you go after. That's the guy that, if you're a team like, Miami, like, you want to win now, but you want to be set for the future. De'Aaron Fox is your guy, man. I mean, I love this trade from San Antonio. You're going to get better post deadline with low expectations, right? Whatever happens this year is A-okay. You're going to have an opportunity in the offseason to continue to build around Victor Wembanyama, right? Because this is a trade that fits next to their superstar, right? How many times do we see Devin Booker is a perfect example of this in Phoenix. The one time they built around their superstar, they were really good, right? The prior 6 years they stunk, they didn't do it. Then the post 3 years of that, they stopped building around Booker and they started adding random talent. It didn't work. What does San Antonio do? Okay, what's the type of player we need to pair next to Victor Wembanyama to be successful? Probably a versatile playmaker who can also get us a bucket. Height doesn't really play a big factor here because of the defensive versatility Wembanyama presents and how unique he is. De'Aaron Fox, 27? Yeah, no, that will do. I mean, A+ move from San Antonio. Seamus, I can't agree more. This is a trade that sets San Antonio up in the long run while maintaining win now mentality. Look at it from a Kings standpoint. Yeah, same thing. You're kind of just committed to being in the play-in, to being a playoff team. Levine's going to give that to you. I look at Chicago from the Chicago side of this, and I'm like, okay, like, you're the big loser here. You traded Levine, who has actually played very, very well this season. That not a lot of people are talking about, but Levine has played very well. You don't get a first-round pick. Maybe it's addition by subtraction. You're gonna tank in the draft order. You give guys like Matas Buzelli, who's actually played very well this season in the limited minutes, some more run. Maybe this is your first step into what tanking looks like, which they've needed to do now for about 2 seasons, and they haven't done. So again, maybe it's a win without actually it being a win for Chicago. But oh my God, San Antonio, outside of LA, you win the deadline because this move was pure. This shows me, I mean, what else do you expect from the San Antonio Spurs, the prestigious front office? They know what they're doing. They've done this for 20 years because, I mean, really, this is a pure masterclass of GMing from San Antonio. You go, you get the 27-year-old on the market. He is no doubt. I mean, he is up for money in this upcoming offseason. Talk about players who lose money, guys. You know, right? Luka lost that Supermax. Sorry, Fox. You also are going to lose out on some money with an extension with San Antonio. But I mean, oh my God, these guys, the Spurs, they're going to be really good in about 2 years. And guess what? In 2 years, De'Aaron Fox is still going to be sub 30. So A+ from the Spurs, Franco. A+. I love it. Thank you. This is how GMing should be done. Take notes, Phoenix. Take notes. I mean, this is how you do it.
And any team,
Yeah,
really.
This is how you do it.
This trade deadline, it kind of seemed like a lot of moves were just moved to fix salaries, and I didn't really feel like a lot of teams took the opportunity to really improve their team either with the long term or short term. But the San Antonio Spurs really have cemented themselves as that up next and upcoming team in the Western Conference. As you look around the Western Conference, you see teams like the Phoenix Suns who are adding just a random talent and kind of just piecing things together as time goes. But you're going to see these teams really fall off a cliff as of next season. And the lane for the Spurs up to the top of the Western Conference after this season or the next, and a couple of contracts expire on other teams, is right to the top. They're going to probably be able to contend for top 3 seeding in the Western Conference very shortly, especially after this move and how well their players around them are developing. You look at teams like the Warriors, which we'll dive into after this, making a move for Jimmy Butler. Great for now. Great. It feeds the media narrative. Gets that quote-unquote third star next to Curry and Draymond, but it's not really a move that I see being a difference maker in Steph Curry going for another contending run in the West. And I think that we're going to see the West be a really big shootout from the 4th seed up to the 11th seed because they're so tight-knit and very close to 500. So there's going to be a lot of teams in the West that don't make the playoffs or the play-in tournament by maybe a half of a game, and it's going to be really interesting to see what transpires. But I think the East kind of really made a lot of statements with the hierarchy of power and the standings, and it's a lot more stand put, and a lot of teams on the Eastern Conference really made their statements of that we are going to be a top contending team, and then a lot of teams really took their foot off their gas this off for this trade deadline.
Yeah. Well, you know what's another West team, guys? Let's talk about the Jimmy Butler trade. Because we kind of touched on it earlier, but we got redirected from the breaking news. This one, I mean, it makes sense. I kind of was expecting this mentally kind of the past month since that news broke that Jimmy was unhappy and he wanted out. He wanted to find his joy again. Guys, now for me, this trade, again, without the contract extension, I'm like, yeah, you know, from a Celtics fan standpoint, you're like, hell yeah, Jimmy's out of the East. That guy gives us trouble every single year, right? That guy is a pest. He turns it up in the playoffs. I got nothing but respect for Jimmy Butler, right? I mean, at the end of the day, seriously. But from an NBA fan, you also look at it and you go, okay, if you're Golden State, this is pretty smart because here kind of lies a guy that pairs next to your timeline right now of Steph Curry. You've committed now to being bad in post 3 years from now, 2 years from now. And you've committed to the Steph Curry, one more potential push at an NBA championship. You go against Jimmy Butler, right? But then you sign him to a 2-year, 121 max contract extension. I mean, I'm sorry, Seamus. I'm sorry. I love the move from a basketball standpoint, But I mean, that is so much money that makes this now, this whole thing, in my opinion, you're paying Jimmy Butler, what, $61 million? I mean, the $61 million next year, that is so much money for a guy that's going to be 36.
Yeah, the extension, the only thing I can silver line about the extension is the fact it's only a 2-year extension and not some crazy 4-year extension. And what I can also say about this trade is the fact Jimmy Butler beat Pat Riley. I mean, he clearly did, because Jimmy Butler got his way in terms of going to one of the 4 teams that he wanted to go to. Of course, at the end of the day, the 2 top suitors were the Phoenix Suns and the Golden State Warriors. But Jimmy Butler, he not only gets traded to a team he wanted to play for, but Jimmy Butler, he also gets paid $121 million over a span of 2 years and gets the extension that he wants. And I'm sure he wanted the long-term max extension, but getting 2 years on that extension at a very high number, very high rate, is certainly a win for Jimmy Butler. And I still believe now people are sitting out there saying, well, Jimmy Butler, we haven't seen playoff Jimmy in years, and he's 35 and he's broken down. He's kind of a headache, can be in the locker room. But when he's not asking for a trade out of town and he's not injured, Jimmy Butler is still one of the best players in the entire NBA and can be a highly impactful player. And we all know from a Boston Celtics perspective, I mean, how much of a pain in the ass he's been to play in the playoffs 2022, 2020, and even 2023. Jimmy Butler, this man just dominated the Celtics in singular individual games, and he was one shot away from making it to the finals 2 years in a row on the Boston Celtics and making it 3 out of 3 times against the Celtics in the NBA playoffs. And Jimmy Butler, I really thought, going back to 2022, talked about that year a lot, but Jimmy Butler, he was just phenomenal in that Eastern Conference Finals series. And I know that was 3 seasons ago, but even the next year, Jimmy Butler came out and he made a huge impact on that Heat team going towards the NBA Finals as an 8 seed. And I really do believe Jimmy Butler, he's one of the better players in this generation that people don't talk about, because he's made 3 finals appearances with this Miami Heat team. Most teams, and even going back, look at the Bulls, look at the Timberwolves, you look at the Sixers, and now the Miami Heat, and now going ahead the Golden State Warriors. Every team he's been on, he's uplifted in some way, shape, or form. And I really go back to that 17-18 Timberwolves team and go, that team, Jimmy Butler. Now, I believe he hurt his knee later in the season that year, but they were a top 4 team in the Western Conference that year with Jimmy Butler. And that was at a time where we thought the Minnesota Timberwolves, they were nothing. Now, last year, they actually came up and grabbed the number 3 seed, and they were in a 3-way tie for number 1. And that's why, this year the Timberwolves being down in the standings is a little surprising. But before Jimmy Butler got to Minnesota, the Timberwolves, they didn't do anything. And when Jimmy Butler got there, they were a top 4 seed in the Western Conference, didn't finish the season that way. But when he was in the lineup, Jimmy Butler made that impact on the Minnesota Timberwolves. And he's just one of the more ferocious players in the entire NBA. His health is certainly going to be a question moving forward at age 35. Last year in the playoffs, now I wouldn't even say last year. Last year was a freak injury. The reason the Celtics didn't see him in round 1, that was because of a freak injury in the play-in game. And it wasn't necessarily because of Butler's body breaking down. It was, oh, he stepped wrong and he stepped on, I forgot which Sixers player's foot at the time, and he missed the whole first round series. I mean, there's really nothing you can do to prevent that, even if you're, really doing the cardio every day. You're eating right. You're, of course, taking care of your body like Mr. Al Horford we talked about the other night. I mean, you can do all that stuff right, but then a freak injury comes around, wipes it all away. So Jimmy Butler, I still think, can be a very, very impactful player with the Golden State Warriors. I think he's going to pair well with Steph Curry. I actually think that Jimmy Butler could be the main ball handler at times with the Golden State Warriors, and Steph Curry can really play off ball and play off of Jimmy Butler a lot of the times. And it's going to be fun too, seeing Jimmy Butler as a cutter with Draymond Green in the lineup as well. So I like the acquisition by the Golden State Warriors, and I honestly think what they gave up for Jimmy Butler, it's really not that much. I mean, Andrew Wiggins, you swap Wiggins for Jimmy Butler. you give up Dennis Schroeder, who really wasn't fitting. I mean, Dennis Schroeder is that one player they got earlier this season because it was, oh, they lost DeAnthony Melton, who was really meshing well next to Curry. But then DeAnthony Melton tears his ACL, unfortunately, and the Warriors just kind of looked around the league and went, oh, we need guard help. Who's giving out a guard? And the Nets went, hey, we got Dennis Schroeder here if you want him. And the Warriors were like, well, I guess sure. And Dennis Schroeder wasn't exactly a fit with the Golden State Warriors at any point in time. And then the Warriors gave up a draft pick as well. But for Butler, you're just full throttle all years ahead if you are the Golden State Warriors, because Steph Curry, he's on the back half of his 30-year-old decade right now. And Draymond Green is inching towards that point. You only have so many years left with these players. They're not really even in contention right now. But Jimmy Butler, it's kind of a desperation move by the Golden State Warriors, but I think it's a move that they had to make. I do want to make another note on this. I was a little confused to see that Kevin Durant could have gone back to the Golden State Warriors and the Suns acquired Jimmy Butler in a 3-team deal that would have sent Wiggins. That Brian Windhorst reported this: Wiggins to the Heat, Butler to the Suns, Durant to the Warriors. What I don't understand about that is, why would the Suns trade Kevin Durant essentially for Jimmy Butler? What is the end goal there for the Phoenix Suns? I mean, the Suns, the Timberwolves, the Kings, they just can't get out of their own way. It's always the same teams that you look at and go, what are they doing? Like, what is happening here? What would the Suns have been doing if they traded Kevin Durant away to the Warriors in their own division, much less their own conference, and returned themselves Jimmy Butler, got Jimmy Butler in return? I don't know what the Suns would have been doing there whatsoever. And I think Jimmy Butler on the Warriors makes a lot more sense, and there's going to be a lot more parity now in the Western Conference with Butler on the Warriors. And I know I joked about him being on the Raptors the other night, but it's good to see a player age 35 actually on a competitive team. And I don't think the Warriors are going to win the title, but could they make some noise out west? Could they upset a first round series, maybe make it to a first round series from the play-in and then go further from there? Certainly so. And Jimmy Butler on the Warriors, it's just going to be another fun acquisition we see at the deadline. We already talked about Fox, talked about Jimmy Butler, of course, Luka with the Lakers, Anthony Davis with the Mavericks. This is seriously, I don't know how the trade deadline every single year just tops itself, because it seems like it's like that every year. 2019 was crazy, and then year after year after year, it's like, oh, and now this happens. When you're talking the Mavericks, I was talking about the Mavericks, they made this shocking Luka trade. Remember 2 years ago at the deadline, they randomly went, you know what, Kristaps Porzingis, we're done with you. We'll see you later. And that was a shocking move the Mavericks made. And then this year they're going full mode on that end. So this year's deadline was certainly one to live through, because the amount of big names, I will say, moving at this deadline was unexpected. Luka Doncic was clearly the one that just blew this deadline out of the water. But even Jimmy Butler, we knew he was going to be moved, and he was actually moved for real assets, and he wasn't just moved for some picks and the nothing out there. Andrew Wiggins going to the Miami Heat, of course. I don't think the Miami Heat, they kind of look like the new Chicago Bulls. Ooh, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, ooh, Andrew Wiggins. Like, hey, let's make a run at the 8 seed, folks. I think that's where the Miami Heat are going at this point in time. But even across the league, we already talked about De'Aaron Fox, Zach LaVine as well, and already mentioned Luka and Anthony Davis. So this year's trade deadline capped off. I mean, it was Jimmy Butler was the main name for the whole time, but just all the other names around him as well. Just it was insane deadline to witness and to cover as well.
Playing tournament on the Western Conference is going to be pretty much the equivalent of the Eastern Conference's round 2 of the semifinals. It's going to be a lot of teams who have put a lot of invested heavily into this year's playoff run this year on the Eastern side. You can kind of see where everyone's going to align, and it doesn't seem like the teams on the Eastern Conference side of things really have to invest as much into their team, have that win now mentality. It seems like it's a lot more developmental on this side, and the pieces will fall where they may. And you look at the Western Conference, Jimmy Butler going to the Warriors is another piecing of the Golden State Warriors, another variation of the Golden State Warriors that we've seen, and we've seen them switch it up a lot recently. I mean, from their last championship run with the Celtics was probably the most well-rounded their team was, and probably the best chance to win with Curry that they've seen. But this is probably the best opportunity that Warriors have this season. Since then, with Jimmy Butler back on the roster, obviously we know the competition level and effort that he brings during the playoffs. And I think that this year is going to be one of those years that you shouldn't be surprised if you see maybe the number 7 seed knock off the 2 seed, or the number 1 seed get knocked out by the 8 seed, which would be the Thunder, the Grizzlies, or even the Nuggets, because of how stacked the Western Conference is going into this playoff run.
Yeah, I mean, the West got wild. I look in the East. I don't really see. I mean, Cleveland got better. Great deal by Cleveland. Shame on you. But like, yeah, Cleveland's. I mean, the teams that were at the top are still at the top. I think in the West, I saw a report today that teams aren't scared. Right, the lower teams aren't scared of the top teams. That's foolish considering of the moves we just saw the lower teams in the play and make to try to compete with the top teams. So I do think the favorites in the West pre-deadline moves are still the favorites in the West post-deadline moves. But I mean, I agree with you, Franco. I think that Western Conference play-in is going to be pretty wild. I think there's going to be a lot of fun playoff matchups in the West. I think obviously when you look into the history of the league, that again, the 40-20 rule is only applies to winning the NBA championship, not so making the NBA championship. So I do think it's really anyone's conference in terms of who can come out. I think there's a handful I'd like to pick. East, it's probably now it's just a 3-headed race: Cleveland, Boston, and New York. Maybe you could dabble Milwaukee in there, but again, after that Middleton deal, I'm not super really sold on them. I thought Middleton was better for them in the long run. So I mean, it was a fun deadline, man. I mean, Boston stood pat. I'm personally happy on that. You saw guys like Fox get moved. You saw guys like Levine, like Luka, Butler. I mean Hunter, Wiggins. I mean, a lot of guys on the move. This deadline, a lot of teams selling, a lot of teams buying, so it's going to be fun, guys. However, we're going to have you covered for post-game live against Dallas tonight from the Celtics side of things. So thank you so much for joining us in today. This is a fun. I mean, this has to be my favorite stream we did. Shout out to all the guests, everybody that. Right. I mean, it's so fun. So everyone that joined in, thank you for watching. All the guests we had on, thank you for joining us. But again, Will, guys, after that final buzzer sounds, yes, Will and Cam, thank you so much. If you're not following them over what they do, make sure you go check them over on X and their socials. Guys, we're gonna have you covered though live after the final buzzer tonight. Celtics Mavericks final rematch, no AD, which kind of is a shame. But again, anytime the two teams that play in the finals play again the following year, despite what the rosters look like, it's always should be fun. But guys, again, thank you for joining us. There's no game that we're celebrating, no win or loss, but still we're gonna cue that music. Until the next time.